Chapter 795. There's no victor on the eastern battlefront. The sun was bright and sunny tomorrow, but the cloud tower was filled with worry. The only piece of good news was that devil main god Sarwenstan had died. The dragons attacked us at all costs. Amelia, the mother of wood spirits, and Dunder, the king of the dwarf gods, personally helped out. They fought for 16 hours and finally succeeded in killing main god Sarwenstan. The Hell Dragons displayed incredibly powerful combat strength in this battle. The legendary 9-headed Hell Dragon Evelyn. The fairies' news was always timely, especially since the eastern battlefront was facing such an unexpected event. We needed good news to boost morale even more. Sarwenstan was probably the most unfortunate main god of all. He had transformed from a devil main god into a chaos lord, but he hadn't even had 2 good days before he was forcefully killed. Even if he had survived, Sophocles would have long since considered him a sacrifice. Sarwenstan wouldn't have been able to survive this. In this battle, Sarwenstan's death had become nothing more than a side character. The Hell Dragons of the Hades had displayed their abilities as legendary dragons and officially received the recognition of the surface dragons. The old Hell Dragon Sam, who had previously been a supreme immemorial white dragon, had finally been able to vent his anger. Based on what I expected, the Hell Dragons would establish their own dragon cities in the mortal plane and establish stable communication channels with the other countries. This would fulfill their responsibilities as messengers of the Hades faction. As for Amelia and the dwarf gods, this counted as a further cooperation between the nature gods and the wood spirits. It was likely that Amelia would soon be given the astonishing title of nature main god. Successfully killing devil main god Sarwenstan was probably the most astonishing combat achievement I had ever achieved in the entire Holy War. It also proved that I had made the correct strategic decision. Having Amelia, the nature gods, and the Hell Dragons hold the line on the western battlefront was indeed the best strategy. They managed to take down Sarwenstan in a very short period of time. Are you certain that you didn't have any selfish intentions of having Amelia stay away from the battlefield? I'm not the god of fate. How could I possibly think that far ahead? Still, it's our greatest fortune that Amelia isn't on the eastern battlefront. I felt a lingering fear. Normally speaking, Amelia should have appeared on the eastern battlefront. However, just her status as a chaos girl would have made Sophocles unhesitatingly choose her as his top target. I had more or less figured out Sophocles' strange situation, but I still needed some time and evidence to verify it. It was now the second morning after the Sophocles explosion. The fairies' magazines and special reports in front of us all carefully avoided mentioning the battle on the eastern battlefront. They only mentioned that a gigantic explosion had occurred and that the specific details were still being investigated. They focused on the victory on the western battlefront. Devil main god Sarwenstan's death would have been an astonishing victory for the entire world several days ago. But now, we can only temporarily forget the pain of war. Haven't you finished analyzing the spatial nodes in that chaotic realm? Did the data for the next level come out? Are there no temperature, atmosphere, or physical constants? Is the rescue team back? Still nothing. Damn it, haven't those unlucky bastards come out from the teleportation room yet? We don't have any more time. This place isn't safe. We need to quickly relocate. The mag's courtyards were no longer as leisurely as before. The previously clean streets were now filled with rubble and trash. In such chaos, all rational mags were carefully conserving every bit of mana they could. There were busy people everywhere. In some ways, the mags' losses were greater than expected. As the mage country's national treasure, the Cloud Tower had lost 5 of its 7 main anti-gravity engines. The Cloud Tower barely managed to float in the air for 10 or so minutes before crashing into Bardi's Hake mountain range. 70% of the streets were damaged. Due to the collision, more than 3,000 residents were injured or killed. The amount of property damage was incalculable. The most critical part was the permanent damage done to the mage towers. Although the Cloud Tower had survived the explosion thanks to thousands of mage towers and tens of thousands of archmages working together to defend the Cloud Tower, it was likely that most of the defensive mage towers would need to be reconstructed. The Cloud Tower wouldn't have any combat strength for the time being. On the battlefield back then, all the magic puppets, war puppets, and summoned creatures that the spellcasters had thrown into the battlefield had been completely annihilated. This was an accumulation of decades or even hundreds of meters. If converted into resources, it would definitely be an astronomical loss. The only thing worth celebrating was that the Cloud Tower had appeared on the battlefield. That's right, for the Mage Country, the Cloud Tower's appearance on the battlefield was actually a fortunate thing. That was because the Cloud Tower had avoided even greater losses, an irreparable tragedy. Mags would always leave spatial imprints in their mage towers. When necessary, as long as they weren't too far away from their mage towers, they could easily teleport themselves back to their mage towers. This was often a mage's final method of escape. The Cloud Tower recorded all registered mags' imprints in their mage towers. The instant that the explosion was about to occur, Archmage Leon and the others activated the final sequence and forcefully summoned all the mags from the Mage Country back to the battlefield. This prevented the most serious possibility, a large number of useless archmages dying. Of course, there were still losses. Teleportation consumed a tremendous amount of energy. Simultaneously summoning several thousand people would consume a tremendous amount of energy, which was another reason why the Cloud Tower had suffered such heavy losses. However, there was another unexpected event that no one had expected. Since the public teleportation rooms had limited space, the mags who had just been teleported here didn't even have time to react before someone stepped on their heads. Stampedes occurred in all the teleportation rooms. The archmages' backs were severely injured, and many were still moaning in pain in their beds. Even so, the teleportation room was still packed to the brim. The tower spirits responsible for teleportation had prepared a backup plan based on the situation, and began directly teleporting the remaining people out. Where were these unlucky fellows now? Whether or not they were still alive in this dimension would depend on us. We would have to wait until we had some free time to check the tower spirits' records. Even so, being able to survive that catastrophe still made people feel a lingering fear, but at the same time, there was also the joy of being reborn after the catastrophe. The Mage Country hadn't suffered the greatest losses. Sophocles' explosion had been even faster than a tsunami. All the Bardi Empire's ships that had been docked along the coastline had all been destroyed. There was no longer any need to search for survivors on the ground. That chaotic dimension was still a forbidden area for the living that couldn't be analyzed. The mags had sent out rescue teams to search the sea in hopes of finding more survivors. I had a long-distance magical communication with Halent. His expression was rather subtle. From a certain standpoint, he had suffered great losses in this battle. He could even be considered a loser. But looking at it from another angle, he had mysteriously obtained what he wanted. He had obtained both fame and benefits. What benefits did he obtain? Sophocles' final attack wouldn't distinguish between friend and foe. Not only did he wipe out everyone on the battlefield, he even transformed his attack into a super powerful shockwave and earthquake that bombarded the entire area with divine power. The first to be affected was Asalivis, which wasn't too far away from the battlefield, or perhaps I should call it the ruins of Asalivis. Almost half of Asalivis city was transformed into a chaotic dimension. The shockwave destroyed the entire city's foundation. The chaos origin power destroyed all dimensional order. All the dimensional portals were destroyed, and the residents of the lower planes would have to find another way to go to Asalivis if they wanted to. The devils, demons, and undead armies stationed in Asalivis. The devils, demons, and undead armies that hadn't been protected by powerful magical defenses probably suffered the same fate as Sophocles' enemies. They had long since returned to the Gui Ming River. The main goal of the Bardi Empire's allied army was to completely wipe out all the dimensional invaders and dimensional portals in Asalivis. This was achieved after Sophocles' explosion. The irony was that Sophocles had personally brought them to this world, and he had personally taken them away. The Eastern battlefront had far more glorious results than the Western battlefront. It was now confirmed that 4 main gods had died: Sophocles, Barbarot, Hymer, and the god of Holy Light's incarnation. Actually, when I saw this list of names, I made up my mind to run as far away as possible from the god of Holy Light's incarnation the next time I saw him. Sophocles was always bombed every time he appeared. He was even more of a calamity than I was. It's not the same thing, alright? Carolan was a god with no personality. After someone analyzed his mechanical logic, luring one of his clones to a fixed location wasn't difficult at all. Killing his clones to weaken his main body was the only way to defeat him. Judging from the results, it would be correct to immediately run away from his clones in the future upon seeing his clones. However, he's always bombing wherever he goes. He's definitely different from your calamity incarnation. The silly cat was still in good spirits. At the very least, she still had the time to comment on me. It seemed that one person was missing from the list of the dead. Calamanders, the god of wisdom. Surprisingly, Calamanders had survived, but the god of wisdom had perished. The specific situation was quite complicated, so I won't talk about it for now. That was to say, there was no victor in this battle at all. If I had to find a victor, it would probably be Sophocles and Cavendish. And now, they had officially become the public enemy of the entire world. The Order faction, Chaos faction, and Hell faction had all suffered heavy losses in this explosion. Not to mention that their goal had been exposed, so everyone was eager to cause trouble for them. But unlike before, as the Chaos dimension was analyzed and stabilized, the Bardi faction would be exposed to the world. Nobody would give them any more time, because that would be the equivalent of the end of the world. The end of this battle was a sign that a new battle was about to begin. I really didn't know what to say about this. Meanwhile, the Mage Country's Truth Symposium members were currently focusing all their attention on analyzing the Chaos dimension. Perhaps this day would soon arrive. Councillor Roland, Councillor Ryan, and Councillor Marguerite have invited you to the third conference room. Tell them that I'll be there immediately. I casually responded to the tamed demon's question as I got up and left. The mags were doing their best to regain their dignity after suffering such a major loss. And the first step would naturally be to analyze their enemies. Chapter 796. Sophocles was a demon king who always acted in a high-profile manner. He often used his incarnations and believers to travel the mortal plane. Only now did people realize that his high-profile manner was actually a type of disguise. If my inference is correct, no, based on my understanding of the gods, it's impossible for my inference to be wrong. Sophocles is a god with no personality. This misjudgment is the root cause of the current situation. There were only a few people sitting around in this spacious conference room. However, my current expression was likely rather unpleasant. After all, this wasn't the first time I had interacted with Sophocles. Only now did I realize that I was communicating with a divine power server that could only think logically and make logical deductions. This seemed rather foolish. At the very least, you discovered the truth after the fact. You're much better off than those who didn't even know the truth after being screwed over. Harlois, you're actually consoling me? You're so used to being so narcissistic. Of course you can think that. I glanced at the silly cat who was using her own method to encourage me. I took a deep breath and reorganized all the information I had in the past. This time, I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Sophocles, more accurately speaking, is no longer a demon from the Chaos Abyss. He's a pure order god. Although it's inconceivable, it's the only explanation for the current situation. Not only were the archmages of the Mage Country present, there was also Halent's special envoy, the fairies' high-level editors, and the Ottoman Empire's Grand Duke Solon. Everyone really wanted to know what exactly had happened and why such an unforeseen event had occurred. As Sophocles' opponent, I probably had the most right to speak on this topic. In order to unify the upcoming battle, I needed to give everyone an explanation. Sophocles successfully used his incarnation to ascend to godhood. He's the god of evolution that everyone has long since forgotten. Perhaps this is a secret in the eyes of everyone, but it's no big secret to everyone here. However, there's one thing that probably nobody remembers. Perhaps everyone believes that the god of evolution has become nothing more than a joke and dark history after Sophocles' true identity was revealed. But actually, the god of evolution has always been living in Sophocles' body. I don't know what Sophocles was thinking, but over the long years, he indeed transformed most of his existence into the god of evolution who had no personal will. The Sophocles that everyone knows of is nothing more than a puppet created by the god of evolution who had no personal will. Sophocles had long since died as an intelligent individual. In fact, it was impossible to determine the exact date of his death. The most likely explanation was that the god of evolution completed his impersonation. That's right, dead people. When an intelligent being gave up on their sense of self, even if they were invincible, they wouldn't even have the concept of themselves. What was the difference between them and dead things? However, an inanimate object caused the entire world to tremble in fear, causing us to pay an unbearable price. The reason? Unreliable. Perhaps he had gone overboard in his pursuit of greater power and was devoured by his more rational and order clone. Perhaps he had forcefully split his mind and finally went insane, giving up on himself. Perhaps he had been deceived by others and walked down the wrong path. Although this sounded rather familiar, I was definitely referring to Sophocles, not Roland. What? Do you feel a little scared? You almost reached that step? Of course. I was scared. Now that I thought about it, if it wasn't for the fact that my system cheated on me, Sophocles would have died. There was no reason why I wouldn't have died back then. After repeated deductions, the truth about Sophocles as an individual was finally revealed. Although it seemed quite amusing, the result was quite difficult to laugh at. Sophocles was an order god who had crawled out from the corpse of a chaos main god. He wore the skin of a chaos main god, and lived in the chaos abyss for countless years. He became Order's mortal enemy, and in the end, he sacrificed everything in order to fulfill his duty as an Order main god, pushing the natural order that he represented to the very peak. The root of everything is still his divine concept, evolution. A god with no personal will was just like a computer that only knew how to think mechanically and work hard. They would do their best to operate according to their predetermined plans, even if that would bring about their destruction. Perhaps a god with no personal will would place an incredibly high priority on their own safety. However, the foundational nature of an order god was that as long as their divine concept conflicted with their own will, they would definitely choose to carry out their divine concept. This was also why no matter how powerful a god with no personal will was, it wouldn't matter. A mechanical and inflexible way of thinking was the stupidest. A god with no personal will is far too inflexible. As long as I act according to your rules, I'll naturally be able to gradually weaken you. As long as I weaken you to a certain degree, I'll be able to easily kill you in the end. If my inference was correct, Sophocles and Cavendish had used the god of Holy Light's mechanical thinking to trick the god of Holy Light into sending an incarnation here. However, Sophocles was stronger than the god of Holy Light in that Sophocles was originally a chaos main god. Not only that, Sophocles' foundational nature of chaos allowed him to devour countless souls and memories, giving him an even more complete artificial intelligence. Sophocles' fake personality made him incredibly sly, and his disguise successfully fooled everyone. It was already too late by the time the truth was revealed. Sophocles' order divine concept was evolution, and the chaos abyss also pursued evolution. An order god had been promoting evolution in the chaos abyss for so many years, yet nobody noticed that something was wrong. And the key person in all of this is the other main god, Cavendish. All Cavendish had done was probably see through Sophocles' disguise and say, "I have a plan that will allow me to truly evolve." Then, he would give Sophocles sufficient evidence and logical reasoning. Sophocles, who was a god with no personal will, would give up everything for the sake of fulfilling his divine concept. It could be said that Sophocles was nothing more than an inanimate object, a tool, or a murder weapon. The true culprit who had caused such a tremendous loss was the mastermind who had used this tool, Cavendish. From the very beginning, Sophocles had always been acting in front of me. He had even led me into his trap many times. Fortunately, I had never trusted Sophocles, so I never fell for his trap. As for who the mastermind behind all of this was, there was no need to mention it. As for whether or not Cavendish himself truly believed in pure evolution, I swore on my kneecap that if he truly believed in it, he would make me suffer the most miserable fate in the world, make me be single for the rest of my life. I can sense the evil intentions of the world. It's best that I don't make such a vow. It'll be different if you don't make a vow. If Cavendish really did have some sort of faith, and I was wrong, then my second uncle's niece's second son was named Second Fool. Next time, everyone can just call him out and beat him up to vent their anger. You're still going to call everyone to beat up Cavendish? The silly cat's reaction was truly quick. Even this didn't make her dizzy. No, there's no need to push him. I simply sensed your evil intentions. I ignored the silly cat who was becoming more and more arrogant as I focused on my deductions. Since it was already confirmed that Sophocles was a god with no personal will and a murder weapon, the remaining facts were simply my deductions. I had originally thought that Cavendish wouldn't have any allies, as nobody would have the same interests as a god of destruction. However, idealists believe that their ideals are more important than their own lives. Sophocles was an exception. From the very start, Sophocles and Sophocles had been on the same side. They had always been acting in front of us and everyone else. The other two Chaos main gods had been tricked by Sophocles and Sophocles. Not only had Sophocles and Sophocles become cannon fodder for Sophocles and Sophocles, but they had also become backup sacrifices for Sophocles and Sophocles' ideals. Sophocles and Sophocles had tricked Sophocles and Sophocles. From the very start, Sophocles had never intended to save Sophocles. The Lord of Tyranny had also been nothing more than a backup sacrifice. If Sophocles had appeared on the Western battlefront, he would have been nothing more than an additional sacrifice. And now, Cavendish had already achieved his goal. He had made a sufficient number of sacrifices to make that chaotic dimensional door open. If we didn't stop Sophocles as soon as possible, everything would become irreversible. Now that the truth was right in front of us, it was quite obvious what we needed to do. Analyze the chaotic dimensional door and destroy it at all cost. And then, kill Cavendish and end everything. Chapter 797. The battle in Bardi wasn't the only battle in this world. Although the news of main gods dying one after another was quite shocking, there was also new information from other battlefields. Out of all the information, the most eye-catching one was probably the Battle of Shidi. An undead army from another dimension ambushed the great demons, helping the human army in San Antonio achieve a great victory. The report said, these undead claim to be remnants of an ancient human empire. They've now returned to the mortal plane and established their capital in the northernmost island. They've also established a formal diplomatic relationship with the Mist Alliance. At this time, Sandro and the other undead emperors finally made their decision and decided where they would stand. The northernmost island that they were talking about didn't actually have a geographical name. It was the northernmost part of the continent. Further north, across the icy ocean, there was indeed a continent. However, due to the extreme temperature, only polar bears and snow monsters could live there. There's also Adam. His basically family with those native great snow demons. I adjusted my eyeglasses slightly. Although Marguerite's tone was calm, I could sense the resentment in her voice. It would seem that my previous trip to the northernmost island hadn't left a good impression on her. However, getting lost in the northernmost ice continent was no longer a case of having no sense of direction. It was more like a curse. I heaved a sigh of relief when Marguerite and Adam returned. It was always a good thing to have trustworthy comrades by my side. Along with them came the Mist Alliance's reinforcements. Marguerite had just arrived, but she immediately started doing all the heavy work of rescuing people. Meanwhile, Adam was completely different from his usual self. He didn't go around causing trouble because he was bored. He was currently weaving a seemingly extravagant feather broom. However, we all knew that this was just an illusion. Adam, can you stop causing trouble? God Envoy Arthur already complained to me yesterday. No matter how many feathers a seraphim has, he'll eventually go bald if he keeps plucking them. It's just a warm-up. I can't take it anymore when I think about the upcoming battle. It's so rare to meet such a high-level opponent, and I don't have to worry about accidentally killing him. Yep, I should go find a seraphim to warm up. I'm going now. I won't be back for lunch. The more he spoke, the more excited he became. It seemed like flames were rising from his head as if he was going to fight the angels for 3 days at any moment. If it wasn't for the fact that I received a report that Seraphim Featherfan, Seraphim Tear, and other rare auction items had appeared in the Cloud Tower's black market, I would have believed it. As for the news of a certain pauper suddenly becoming rich and generously buying all the forbidden books in the book market, I didn't care about such boring things. I simply handed it over to Marguerite to deal with. The red light that night was truly bright. A certain man's despairing screams of my collection were indeed pitiful. Many married men even shed tears of sympathy for their fellow sufferers. What was even more pitiful was that he probably believed that the discovery of his new book collection was nothing more than an accident. He even intended to resell high-level angel feathers and other rare items in order to restock his stock. Wasn't he coming back for lunch? Seraphy in rare gods. So that he needed to? That all, the god in was that should have in, other in gods, that was. That. Bye. Just as I was considering whether or not I should do my job as a counselor and investigate these ridiculous merchants, I noticed that Marguerite's mouth was twitching. Was that a smile? Marguerite was actually smiling so happily. All right then, I'd been seen through. Adam, take care of yourself. Forget it, I wasn't going to remind him. It would probably be nice to see a joke when I was depressed. Angels. That's right, the Cloud Tower now had 2 entire armies of high-level angels. Although in a way, they were indeed quite annoying, it was quite reassuring to have them as temporary allies. While we were preparing for war, the battlefield before us had yet to return to normal. At this point, Cavendish was basically declaring war on the entire world. The God of Holy Light scheme was right in front of us. We didn't even have time to say anything as the ruler of the world, the God of Holy Light, finally couldn't bear it any longer. His incarnation being destroyed was already the most serious challenge for him. Opening the door directly threatened the order of the entire world. This was the highest level of threat for his mechanical mind. And so, the God of Holy Light, who didn't have a personal god, unhesitatingly abandoned all restraint. The gods and angels of the Holy Light faction descended to the mortal world like dumplings being dropped into a pot. Battle angel armies were thrown onto the battlefield, and more than 1,000 years of accumulated resources were used up. There was no possibility of a ceasefire in this chaotic dimension created by the fall of a god. The Holy Light faction and angel squadrons unhesitatingly entered this chaotic battlefield. As for the cloud fortress that was closest to the battlefield, the Holy Light faction also sent 2 top-level squadrons and several dozen subsidiary squadrons to defend it. There were more than 30,000 angels scattered around, and the leader of the Holy Light faction, Arthur, seemed to be a legendary figure in history. As for whether these 2 top-level angel armies were here to protect the Cloud Tower or to threaten us heretics from acting rashly, everyone knew the answer to that. This was obviously a violation of the mag's dignity. However, I managed to convince the other counselors to accept the God of Holy Light's reinforcements. After all, it would be foolish to have a conflict with the God of Holy Light at such a time. If the God of Holy Light's mechanical mind decided to deal with the outside world first and turned around to attack us instead, we would be in deep trouble. Besides, it was quite rare to have such precious single-celled fighters. It would be a good thing even if they were just scouts. All we had to do was bear with it for a few days. The end result was that we would see angels flying above our heads every morning. These angels really did think that they were the masters of this city. They completely ignored the mag's morals. And so, the low-level and mid-level angels that were patrolling the city disappeared at a steady pace. High-level angels would often mysteriously be challenged by powerful individuals, which kept the God of Holy Light, Arthur, incredibly busy every day. As for whether the angels would end up as experimental subjects for insane mags or end up on the black market. Actually, when considering the fact that there was an abundant supply of angels and the constantly falling prices of goods, I even wanted a cheap and beautiful angel maid. Although it would be a pity if I didn't have any feelings for her, that also meant that she wouldn't slack off, wouldn't ask for money, and would be quite pleasing to the eye. She would be a great long-term worker. But recently, God of Holy Light Arthur had been complaining to me every day. If I bumped into him at such a critical time, it would be best if I didn't cause any new diplomatic incidents. You can ask Adam to help you buy one. You can even watch them make a fool out of themselves. Harloise's suggestion surprised me for a moment. I then chuckled and gave her a thumbs up. I liked this suggestion 32 times. And so, I directly started writing a letter to Adam using special paper that would self-destruct. My friend, please choose a young and beautiful angel maid. I'll help you stall Marguerite. Everyone knew that I was someone who never lied. Marguerite, give me some face. Let's let Adam off this time. Men always have their own unique needs. This isn't disloyalty. It's just a normal male need. At the very least, he didn't buy the most popular angel maid recently. Your face. How much is that worth? Marguerite smiled coldly as she picked up her staff and left. It would seem that not only had my words failed to extinguish her anger, they had even added fuel to it. Judging from her expression, she was about to go berserk. All right, I had already stalled him, but unfortunately, I hadn't managed to stall him. So, my friend, good luck. Roland, you seem to have a lot of resentment towards Adam. While you're fighting for your life on the battlefield, your best friend is fooling around and flirting with girls. The moment he sees you, he'll even tell you about his travel and leisure experiences. He'll even keep adding things like it's a pity you didn't go, otherwise you would have been so happy. What would you think? I understand. The silly cat nodded and continued pretending to be asleep. Only the sound of a pen scratching on paper could be heard in the room. There were already more than 10 letters stacked on the table. Some were letters, and some were replies. I had been quite busy over the past few days in order to gather all the manpower I had. Suddenly, the silly cat lifted her head. Both of us also looked towards the window. Apart from the familiar starlight, it was also because someone we had been waiting for so long had finally arrived. Sandro, since you're here, it would seem that you've already made a decision. Chapter 798. From a certain standpoint, the undead emperors could indeed be described as sly and cunning. When would be the best time to prove their innocence? Of course, it would be when a powerful common enemy appeared. Cavendish's sudden appearance made the undead emperors acceptable. Due to the previous battle against the ogres, the ancient undead had already expressed their stance. Now, the undead republic which had taken over the entire glacier continent was no longer a powerful enemy, but an ally that could be won over. At the very least, nobody would want the undead emperors to stand on the enemy's side until the Holy War ended. I felt rather conflicted as I looked at the seemingly friendly old man before me. Was Sandro trustworthy? Even if I thought with my knee, which had always been shot in the back, I knew that the undead emperors were untrustworthy. However, I indeed needed their help, just like how they needed us. The other factions wouldn't necessarily go all out against the powerful Cavendish and his allies. That was because it would be better for everyone if they won. There wouldn't be any actual benefits or spoils of war. Although everyone seemed to be quite loud about this public service event, I was actually quite doubtful about their morale and determination if they really had to fight to the death. However, Sandro and the other undead senators who had decided to rebuild the Ice Republic were different. Since they had chosen to ally with the humans instead of being enemies, they naturally wanted to prove their worth in this holy war. The first ones they needed to deal with were their own kind. I don't have any other requests. I won't give you random orders. I also know that you won't take my words seriously on the battlefield. But, you should be able to take care of your own mess, right? I'll leave conservation and sharpness to you. Although we were allies, if I made too many requests, even if Sandro agreed, the benefits would be greatly reduced. It would be better to let them focus on taking care of their own kind. Sandro was quite straightforward as he directly agreed. However, he also made an additional request. I'll personally help Cavendish. Count me in. This was obviously beyond my expectations. Sandro was actually so enthusiastic about helping me. Pies that fell from the sky were always poisonous. For example, Sophocles had previously suggested that we work together to attack Cavendish together. I wouldn't have dared to accept it if he still had such good intentions. And from the darkness plane has died. She's also a chaos girl. She and you. I became even more astonished. The undead senators weren't exactly friendly creatures. Sandro, who had agreed to betray his teammates because of this, was actually trying to take revenge on Cavendish for the sake of his comrades. She is the granddaughter of my disciple, and also my adopted daughter. Sophocles' tone of voice was completely emotionless, making it impossible for me to tell if he was telling the truth or not. However, this was more than enough reason for me. At the very least, Sandro, who had a lot on his mind, wouldn't possibly side with Cavendish. It was highly unlikely that Sophocles' special situation would occur again. Alright, I'll arrange it. After setting up a communication spell, Sandro transformed into nothingness and disappeared from our sight. Our senses were completely useless against him. Perhaps he had relied on this ability to enter the city of clouds, which was full of angels, as an undead. I also heaved a sigh of relief at Sandro's promise to fight on the battlefield. After all, the two undead emperors whose current situation was still unknown were most likely enemies, which gave me quite a bit of pressure. Sharpness might be fine, but if conservation met me on the battlefield, she would likely give up everything and unhesitatingly hunt me down. A super-living cannon tower that specialized in offensive forbidden spells and had limitless energy would forever be locked onto me. I felt that it would be better to make some preparations. Even if conservation's energy level was at the level of a main god, I still felt that she wouldn't be able to take advantage of Sandro. From a certain standpoint, although we hadn't obtained victory in the previous battle, I felt that the current situation wasn't that difficult to accept. At the very least, it's better than being in complete darkness. I had never worried about how hopeless or dark the situation would be. Nor did I worry about how powerful my opponents would be. No matter how powerful a giant was, he or she would still have a weakness. But previously, Cavendish and his allies had been hiding in the shadows and making preparations. This was indeed quite a headache for me. The worst part wasn't how powerful your opponent was. It was that they were hiding in the shadows while you were out in the open. They were digging traps for you to jump into, and you could only let them lead you by the nose. Although Sandro and his allies had achieved astonishing results on the battlefield, that chaotic dimension also exposed their existence and weaknesses. As long as they appeared before us, we would at least be able to target them instead of just passively dealing with them. I wasn't some immortal who was ridiculously intelligent. In order to make the correct strategic decision, the prerequisite was to have accurate information. As Cavendish and his allies officially revealed themselves, his goal and his allies were gradually revealed to the world. Their goal was quite clear. They wanted to collect the Chaos Girls and obtain the key to open the dimensional walls. Then, they would use the dimensional door that was currently forming in the chaotic dimension to open up an exit to the outside world. In that case, Sandro and his allies had obviously exposed three major weaknesses. The first is to stop them from searching for the Chaos Girls. The second is to attack that chaotic dimension and completely destroy their dimensional door. The third is, I paused for a moment before finally saying it out loud, to completely kill Cavendish and eliminate all future threats. The core of this entire incident was Sandro himself. No matter how I looked at it, it would be the easiest way to destroy him physically in order to foil his scheme. I would deal with my own problems by myself, fill up my own hole by myself, and deal with my own problems by myself. Just like how I had left the two undead emperors to Sandro to deal with, I had no intentions of leaving Cavendish to anyone else to deal with. But for Cavendish and his allies, yesterday's victory had become today's burden. That chaotic dimension hadn't completely stabilized yet when the holy light gods hurriedly started a fierce attack. Since the dimensional door's location had already been confirmed, the holy light gods didn't even have the space to retreat. Now, that chaotic dimension had truly become the ancient battlefield of the holy war. Countless demons and angels were fighting against each other, but it was still impossible for a victor to appear. 10 years ago, the death of a certain god would have attracted the attention of the entire continent. But over the past few days, meteor showers had been falling in the sky. It was impossible to count how many holy light gods had died. Even low-level god envoys and high-level angels had become cannon fodder on the battlefield. Even I didn't want to get close to such a battlefield. Even the proud dragons had wisely chosen to retreat. The main gods of holy light, Cavendish, and the other main god-level existences, as well as the higher-ups of both sides, all remained abnormally silent. This wasn't because there was a possibility of peace negotiations. Rather, both sides were accumulating their strength in preparation for the final battle. Every day, not only would we receive the remains of the war angels from the front lines, Cavendish's mutated demon specimens would also be sent back from the front lines. As we analyzed the specimens, our chances of victory kept increasing. Finally, I received a piece of information that made it necessary for me to head to another battlefield. Cavendish is attacking the fire elemental plane. At such a critical moment, I fell silent. Others might not know what the fire elemental plane represented, but I did. Eliza. Chapter 799. As the masters of the elements, mags would always have some sort of connection with the elemental planes. Not long ago, mags had even constructed bases in the various elemental planes in order to collect resources and choose talents. The smallest of these bases was the fire elemental plane. In fact, it could only be described as a temporary base. In the Cloud Tower's records, the other elemental planes and outer planes bases were all described as certain cities or towns. However, the fire elemental planes base was described as a fire elemental plane observation room. When I arrived at the fire elemental plane, I discovered that even the name of an observation room was exaggerated. There was only a dimensional door buried deep underground and some specially preserved food and water. The mage stationed at the fire elemental plane greeted me in surprise when he saw me walk out of the dimensional door. However, he was obviously depressed when he discovered that I wasn't one of the mags who had switched shifts with him. Master Roland, if it's possible, please suggest to the higher-ups that we cancel this fire elemental plane observation room and just keep the dimensional door. Last year, we only left the fire elemental plane 2 times a year, and the number of visitors we received was less than 2 digits. The middle-aged mage named Moti started complaining endlessly about the bastard's working environment when he saw the truth emblem on my chest. The fact that he didn't recognize me at all doubtlessly meant that he hadn't returned to the mortal plane for a very long time. Although the other elemental planes were tough, they were quite beneficial for mags who specialized in elemental magic. The high elemental tide was a great thing for magic cultivation. The local elemental resources could be used to increase one's income by 10%. There were quite a few mags who were willing to apply for a fire elemental plane observation room every year. As Moti complained, I learned that no mage in the fire elemental plane had ever applied for a fire elemental plane observation room. The observation room was forcefully assigned to fire mags. The extremely harsh environment and high temperatures were one of the reasons. However, the main reason was that the fire elemental plane's native residents were far too hospitable. Middle-level and low-level elemental creatures didn't need to eat. If they weren't driven by someone, this was basically impossible in the mortal plane. They wouldn't be able to come to the mortal plane without being summoned or driven by someone. They wouldn't be very aggressive in most situations. Only fire elemental creatures would be as active as rabid dogs and unhesitatingly attack any living target. And it just so happened that fire elemental creatures were incredibly valuable opponents. It would be fine if they could win, but if they couldn't, they would self-destruct. Finally, they would painstakingly achieve victory, and it was likely that all the elemental materials they had collected would have been destroyed. Not only that, this was their home turf, so it would be impossible to kill them. Nobody would like such opponents. In a sense, the fire elemental plane was the elemental plane closest to the abyss. Many fire elemental lords had dual identities as demons and elemental creatures. Most demons had fire elemental bloodlines in their bodies, so they had extraordinary fire resistance. Here, the high temperature and sulfuric air made it impossible for mortals to survive. The extremely aggressive elemental residents were a disaster for any outsider. Mage Moti, who was in front of me, had faint dark runes flowing on her skin. Her eyes were also faintly glowing with a fiery light. It was obvious that she was also a member of the Chaos Abyss. The red magic runes on her arms and legs were obviously unique to fire archmages. A demon kin with a fire-type bloodline. It seemed his rank wasn't low either. What a rare creature. I felt rather sorry for this unlucky bastard. I heard that he had already been stationed here for 7 years. Based on the usual 3 to 5 year cycle, he should have been replaced long ago. And since Moti had finished his mission, he should have been transferred back to the headquarters for a promotion, a pay raise, and a fair, rich, and beautiful wife. Obviously, either he couldn't find a suitable candidate, or he had already been forgotten by the headquarters. That was why he was so friendly with every passerby, hoping to pass on his message. Only a few people come every year. On average, you don't see a single person every month. Even if you want to find someone to talk to, you're so unlucky. Yeah, I thought that my bloodline was suitable for such an environment. I was so lucky. Not only did I see a single person every month, the worst time was when I didn't see a single person for 1 year and 3 months. Whenever I went out, all I saw were those endless mad dogs and bomb maniacs. I originally had an acolyte, but he left without any protection after only 4 weeks. He was sent back to the mortal plane with burns and poison all over his body. That bastard was burnt to a crisp, but he was still smiling when he left. I'm going to take care of him when I get back. But I heard from the last guest that he was already promoted to be at the same rank as me. The result of not talking to anyone for a long time was that I would immediately become a chatterbox when I had the chance. In the past, Moti's acolyte had managed to reach the same rank as himself, but he had been held back for many years because of a rubbish position that was sent out to the outside world. He hadn't made any progress at all as he watched other youngsters climb above him, while he himself was still wasting his time. Wasn't this the real-life version of a midlife crisis? The more I looked at it, the sadder I felt. It was no wonder that he was so friendly. It was probably because of my truth emblem that he hoped that I would be able to speak up for him at the Truth Symposium. Sure, it's no big deal. I'll talk to the Truth Symposium when I get back. Is Senator Ryan in charge of sending people out to the outside world? I'm quite familiar with him. I immediately agreed, but I still didn't add any cold water when I saw how overjoyed the Archmage was. The current Moti was probably an exiled from the headquarters. It was rare for him to meet a high-ranking official from the headquarters, so of course he would try his best to curry favor with Moti in hopes of changing things for the better. But as far as I could remember, the Truth Symposium was currently in the midst of a full-scale war. They wouldn't have any spare time to take care of the people who were sent out to the outside world. It was just like World War II in my previous world. When the major countries fought against each other, the overseas colonies that were far away from home would be long forgotten. Not to mention, the Truth Symposium would be an isolated island with no resources, no actual combat information, and no practical use for the Truth Symposium. It was likely that Moti would be forgotten for a very long time before the war. Perhaps the Truth Symposium would be re-established after the war, and if his previous superior died in battle or was sent to another position, Moti would still be forgotten by the new superior. Of course, saying anything right now would be meaningless. After all, everything was still changing. Perhaps as the Holy War continued, the elemental planes would become meaningless. Perhaps the elemental planes would be cancelled, and Moti would naturally return. Or perhaps the mags would have higher expectations for the elemental planes and invest more into them. As a veteran here, this would also be a chance for Moti to rise up. Continue working hard. At the very least, the situation won't get any worse than it already is. I said something that sounded like a polite encouragement. It would be best not to make any random promises at a time like this. However, I was already satisfied with such an answer. Moti's eagerness also helped me quite a bit. I had been stationed here for so long, constantly being attacked by the fire element. I was so bored that I could only desperately cultivate. Although Moti didn't have a high position, his power level far surpassed his peers. I could sense that this dark-skinned, middle-aged man had actually broken through the legend rank and faintly reached the level of saint. However, his emblem was only a gold emblem. 10 years ago, a saint-ranked archmage like Moti wouldn't have been left here to waste his time. Not only did Moti understand the situation here, his combat strength was also quite high. This allowed him to travel through this dangerous plane. His rather boring job had helped him greatly in developing new planes. At the very least, he could be said to be an expert in the fire elemental plane. Thanks to Moti's introduction, I was gradually able to see the most recent developments in the fire elemental plane. The new fire elemental god. When did this happen? Why haven't there been any reports? I've already made a report. I wrote a report 5 days ago, but I haven't received any response. Did something happen in the Cloud Tower? Chapter 800. The new elemental god. That's super important information. Why hasn't anyone reported it? I reported it 5 days ago, but I haven't received any response. Did something happen in the Cloud Tower? Of course, Moti's report wouldn't receive any response. 5 days ago, the Truth Symposium had been incredibly busy. How could they possibly have the time to respond to an unimportant information report? However, this information was incredibly important to me. The new fire elemental god should be called One Grain of Sand. What a strange name. Shouldn't that be the name of the earth elemental god? One grain of sand. I was even an egg, Eliden. Although I would always end up making all sorts of jokes when I translated people's names back and forth, such as a certain Chang Kaishan, but when I heard this name, I actually didn't feel surprise or doubt. Instead, I had a strange feeling of it really is her. Eliza was a fire sea marchioness, and she also had the ability to devour fire and ice to evolve. With these two abilities, in this elemental plane where delicious food was everywhere, as long as she lowered her limits and evolved again, as long as she had enough time, there would likely be no elemental lord that could defeat her. But that wasn't what made me feel annoyed or even sad. It would seem that she still doesn't believe in you. No, perhaps it's precisely because she believes in you that she chose this path. Sometimes, the silly cat's comments would catch me off guard. This time, I silently agreed with her. The battle against the Chaos Girls was probably coming to an end. Neither the remaining victors nor the losers would be easy to deal with. Even I didn't have absolute confidence that I could guarantee Eliza's safety. And now, Cavendish's scheme was coming to an end. The only remaining Chaos Girls had become precious strategic resources. The usual way to deal with such important strategic resources was that if we couldn't obtain them, we absolutely couldn't let our enemies obtain them. If Eliza had asked me for help, of course I would have done my best to protect her. But fate was unpredictable. There was always a possibility. If there's no turning back, and only by sacrificing her can you save the world, what else would you not be willing to sacrifice if you're even willing to sacrifice yourself? That silly girl, is she afraid that you'll be troubled, or does she have no confidence in you? I think it's both. Even if the probability was very small, it couldn't be denied. Just the existence of this probability was enough for Eliza to choose to survive alone. Perhaps, she was afraid that I would make a choice. When danger descends, the only one that can be relied on is oneself. Although I had instilled such a concept into Eliza before, I was still rather heartbroken to be treated like this at this time. This girl is looking down on me too much. If we have to sacrifice a woman to save the world, then we might as well destroy the world. I'm not a saint, nor am I the creator who controls the power of life. Everyone has family and friends, and existence itself is a kind of value. Life has its own weight, and apart from oneself, no one has the right to ask others to sacrifice themselves. I respected brave warriors who risked their lives for justice because there were indeed some things in this world that were more important than life itself. However, I despised those bastards who said, if too many people die, they're just a number. I also sincerely hoped that they would become one of the numbers they spoke of as soon as possible. Sacrifice is a virtue. Why didn't the person who said this stare at it first? Harlois was rather surprised to sense that I wasn't just saying something nice. Then what would you do if you really met such a situation? Watch the world be destroyed? No, I would do my best to find a third method that would be the best of both worlds. Actually, I already had a final plan. For example, I could create a small room made of adamantine with sufficient food and control, and have the Chaos Girls fall into a deep sleep. Then, I could stuff them into a certain dimensional core area and release them after we're done with the battle. Or, I could use the method and coordinates that Bayphone gave me to send the Chaos Girls out of Aishi. Although it would be a pity that they wouldn't be able to return, it's still better than dying here. For some people, this would be worse than death. Harlois shook her head. This was basically the same as not saying anything at all. Eliza definitely wouldn't agree to such a plan. I shrugged. That was why I called it a final plan, a method that would only work if there was no other way. At the very least, it was much better than the previous two options. But now, Eliza had evidently chosen to believe in me. Successfully ascending to the fire elemental god throne would also be a type of sacrifice. Not only would she gain control of the fire elemental plane, but the fire elemental plane would also bind her to it. And as long as Eliza's soul didn't die, this binding would probably last for eternity. And now, if Cavendish still refused to give up, he would have to face an elemental god who controlled the entire fire elemental plane. As I previously mentioned, the elemental gods in their own fire elemental planes wouldn't be any weaker than the main gods. This was especially true since Eliza was already quite strong to begin with. She had even strengthened herself after ascending to the fire elemental god throne. It would be absolutely difficult for Cavendish to defeat her. Let's go and take a look at the battlefield. The information I obtained was from 3 days ago. The chaos domain was still being analyzed, and everything was still unclear. At that time, Cavendish's army was already attacking the fire elemental plane. Considering the size and scale of the fire elemental plane, it would be perfectly normal for the fire elemental plane to fight for several hundred years if the goal was to eliminate the fire elemental gods. No matter how special the situation was, the fire elemental plane was still ongoing. I felt more and more like Cavendish was being irrational. Forcefully attacking the fire elemental plane at such a time was definitely an unwise decision. But looking at it from a different angle, perhaps it was also because Eliza had decided to go all out, forcing him into a situation where he couldn't back down. Perhaps there's a chance, if I could obtain Eliza's assistance in stalling Cavendish's main forces, or even himself, here, then the pressure on the mortal plane would be greatly reduced. And in the fire elemental planes, the elemental lords and high-level elemental creatures were capable of repeatedly reviving. They were the best cannon fodder in the world. I didn't believe that attacking the fire elemental plane would be a wise decision. Back in the day, I had forced myself to challenge Amdaroken not only because he had gone too far in the Northlands, but also because I wanted to kill him while he was seriously injured. I had only been able to win because he had been away from the Earth elemental plane for far too long. He had long since developed a bad connection with the Earth elemental throne, which was far from normal. I admired Cavendish's confidence in challenging an elemental god who was in perfect condition, had limitless power, and had limitless regenerative abilities. Don't think too highly of yourself. Since Cavendish dared to do such a thing, he's likely confident. I nodded. Right now, our most important goal was to find out just what that confidence was. Chapter 801. I had traveled through countless planes, including the upper planes that were filled with holy light and positive energy, as well as the chaos abyss, which was filled with distortion and chaos. I didn't know which plane had the deepest impression of me and was the most suitable for traveling, but the fire elemental plane was definitely one of the worst planes for tourists. Not only was the air incredibly hot and poisonous, I was ambushed 6 times in less than 10 minutes. From berserk fire demons to low-level fire elemental creatures that I could crush at any moment, they would unhesitatingly charge at me the moment they saw me. The only difference was that the fire elemental creatures' roars when they attacked were different. If they could win, they would attack head-on. If they couldn't win, they would self-destruct. The fire elemental creatures here were even more berserk and disgusting than the ones in the mortal plane. Are they ever going to stop? They're like cockroaches. Every time we see one, there's a dozen of them. There's no end to this. I started complaining since I didn't feel like I was making any progress. If you deactivate your domain, we'll probably be able to travel much faster. What? Deactivate the air conditioning? No, I'd rather kill my way over than be dehydrated by the heat. The air outside was poisonous and spicy, while the air around me was clean and cool. It was snowing faintly above my head. As a self-proclaimed ice archmage at the truth level, it would be far too terrible of me if I couldn't even change the environment around me. However, Moti was still freeloading off the air conditioning. Even though he was clearly feeling quite comfortable, he kept trying to convince me to deactivate my ice domain. Archmage Roland, I apologize for underestimating your spellcasting ability in the fire elemental plane to summon such a powerful ice domain. However, Your actions are equivalent to declaring war on all fire elemental creatures in the area. I waved my hand and interrupted his question. I smiled as I looked at the sky above me, where a red raven covered in magma was circling above me. At this level of power, I had finally met an elemental lord-level existence. We're finally here. Rather than randomly walking around like this, why don't we find a guide? An elemental lord should know where their god is. Yep, it'll tell me. I'm certain. 10 minutes later, the fire raven that had become incredibly docile soared in the sulfur-smelling sky. I was now able to comfortably lie on its back and look down at the scenery. However, ice shards were still falling from its fiery wings on the upper half of its body. Its pitiful appearance made people worry about whether it would suddenly fall from the sky. Did I go too far? It's fine. In this plane, as long as the fire elemental creatures don't die on the spot, they can quickly recover from any kind of injury. The silly cat was still crawling on my head. Although she was still in her black cat form, she wasn't a clone this time. Instead, she was using a transformation spell to transform into a cat form, which confused me. Aren't you very busy? I'm worried about you. Heh, what's there to worry about? If we can win, we'll fight. If we can't, we'll just run away with Eliza. Although the bug-like world has been destroyed, I'm still very confident in my ability to survive. Although I wasn't used to seeing a cat's expression, this cat definitely glared at me just now. She even used my head to sharpen her claws. What did I do to offend her? It's precisely because you think that I'm worried. The silly cat sighed yet again with an expression of an incorrigible idiot. Even though she was just a silly cat, she actually dared to look down on me. Just as I was thinking about whether or not I should feed her milk or find a chance to throw the cat from the sky, the scene before me finally changed. What was before me was no longer bright red. In the distance, a pitch-black dimensional door was quite eye-catching. The familiar power of chaos was doubtlessly another dimensional door leading to the chaos abyss. There were black and red dots the size of ants on the ground. Were they clashing? Doubtlessly, it was a battle between demons and fire elemental creatures. I could faintly sense the explosion of magic power in the triple digits. This was an elemental lord fighting against a powerful demon. Without a doubt, we had entered another battlefield, and the intensity of the battle was quite high. Judging from the approaching black and red dots, we had company. At this time, I didn't want to waste any more time on this meaningless battle. Meaningless? There were countless demons in the chaos abyss. Even though he was the youngest demon main god, he still had an astronomical number of demon soldiers and generals under his command. In the previous battles, he hadn't mobilized his main forces, so it was impossible to calculate how many he had. However, it was impossible for him to finish all the battles in a short period of time. This was even more true for the fire elemental plane. As long as they didn't die on the spot, the fire elemental creatures would recover incredibly quickly. Even if they died, they would be able to quickly regenerate. I was becoming more and more confused. Attacking the fire elemental planes was meaningless to begin with. If I was in Cavendish's position, rather than sending an army to attack, I would have directly led a few main god-level subordinates to form a small ambush squad. That would have a higher chance of success in forcefully kidnapping the fire elemental lords. What confused me even more was that although I sensed many fire elemental and chaos lord level mana sources, there weren't many that gave me a sense of threat. There weren't any powerful gods or main god level existences on the battlefield either. If it was on such a large scale, Eliza wouldn't even need to personally take action. I had originally thought that Cavendish would send a sufficient number of elites and powerful individuals to participate in this battle. However, while the demons below weren't weak, they were obviously far from the top-level combat strength that I had expected. I casually summoned a blizzard and tossed it at a fire dragon that got too close and was baring its fangs and claws. I then exploded with magic power that far surpassed that of a saint rank in order to chase away the fire dragons that were looking at me with unfriendly gazes. Half a minute later, my magic explosion attracted a certain person's attention as expected. A familiar magical wave rose up from the volcanoes in front of me. Bright red magical waves transformed into a tsunami that swept across the battlefield. Even the Chaos Lords lowered their proud heads in the areas that the tsunami touched. Just the fact that the Chaos Elemental Lord's attention was enough to double the combat strength of the Chaos Elemental Lords. Compared to my memories, this mana source was far stronger. It was like the difference between a torch and the sun. In fact, this mana source was several times stronger than Amdarokan's from back in the day. Perhaps this was what an elemental god should be like. Compared to what I had expected, the current elemental gods were far more powerful. I also knew that I had reached my goal. The master of this dimension had noticed my arrival and sent me an invitation. Moti, go back and do your own work for now. I'll report what happened to you to the Truth Symposium. Just relax and wait for my news. I changed my mind. At such a distance, it would be faster for me to fly by myself. I directly had that fire bird take Moti back as I flew towards the volcanoes that had sent me the invitation. However, the silly cat on my head didn't seem willing to continue acting as a mascot. Roland. I know. You don't need to say anything. At the very least, let me see her first. Chapter 802. While Roland was busy fighting against the demons in the fire elemental plane, the flames of war in the mortal plane didn't stop. In fact, they even burned even more fiercely. Halent would never have imagined that the war he started in order to reclaim lost territory would ultimately cause Bardi to forever lose that territory. In the past, Victoria Port's outer forest area was known as Asalivis. But today, it was the battlefield of the gods and demons, the frontlines of light and shadow. Countless demons crossed dimensions to arrive. They came in all shapes and sizes. The only thing they all had in common was their anger from being forcefully summoned by the Chaos Abyss, as well as their violent and easily angered tempers. Nobody knew how Cavendish had accomplished this, but he had indeed accomplished it. The will of the Chaos Abyss had summoned countless creatures of chaos from all other dimensions to participate in this final battle between the gods and demons. In this area where there was no blue sky to cover the battlefield, angels and demons fought each other in every corner of the dimensional cracks. However, it was still difficult for either side to gain an advantage. No matter how many troops they sent, no matter how powerful the war angels and gods were sent to this battlefield, the endless sea of demons would treat them all the same. Forcefully attacking this chaotic dimension at this time wouldn't be a wise choice for the Holy Light faction gods and angels. The broken and chaotic dimensional laws of this world made it obvious that the creatures of order were at a disadvantage on this battlefield. Demons, who were skilled at melee combat and chaotic battles, naturally enjoyed such a scene. However, their main god, who usually lacked enthusiasm and presence, was now angrily roaring in battle. He constantly urged the gods and their warriors to enter this dimension of death. It was as if he was a gambler who had gone crazy from gambling, hurriedly throwing everything he had accumulated over thousands of years into this hopeless battlefield. Eradicate the world's poison. Destroy it. Cavendish, destroy the dimensional door to the dimensional barrier. This was the will and fury of the strongest main god. When the god of holy light, K.A. Roland, personally arrived on the battlefield, this vague will drove the Holy Light faction gods to bring all of their power and servants to offer their final loyalty to their master's glory and order faction. True gods could also fall on this battlefield. The meteors in the sky turned into torrential rain. The enraged god of war used his body to break through the barrier of space in search of his prey. The fallen Valkyrie did not have a chance to return to their divine throne. There was no difference between civil and military jobs, only the difference between the hunter and the prey. The famous and respected oracles shouted angry slogans and launched desperate attacks. Even the imps could sneer and return the enthusiasm of their opponents with fireballs. The abyss also suffered heavy losses. Countless demon lords and demon nobles had already fallen in this region. The ancient ones, who had dominated countless planar battlefields, had entered this battlefield where there was no chance of retreat. Their deaths were no different from that of a young demon born 10 years ago. When the Holy Light faction's war machine was activated, the gods joined forces and directly tore apart the battlefield's defenses. The will of the Chaos Abyss urged the ancient demons and newborn demon nobles to enter the battlefield. Then, they would all die or self-destruct in a few seconds or a few dozen minutes. Not to mention, the furious god of holy light was unstoppable on the battlefield. He repeatedly broke through the Chaos Abyss's defenses. The high-level war angels were summoned by the gods of high heaven who were in dire straits. They could also burn their own life force to complete their mission. However, they called it a glorious sacrifice rather than a desperate self-destruction. Correspondingly, countless of their own kind were forced to enter this battlefield. The imps and demon nobles were essentially no different from each other. Even after they used up their last bit of power, they would still be mercilessly transformed into flesh bombs to offer their final loyalty to the Chaos Abyss. The gods and demons were all the same on the battlefield where there was no mercy or retreat. However, the Holy Light faction's target, the Dimensional Door of Chaos, which was constructed from black iron and bronze, and which was decorated with the statues of the two goddesses of chaos as its pillars, wasn't destroyed at a rate visible to the naked eye. Instead, the Dimensional Door of Chaos became even more active as more and more sacrifices appeared in this chaotic dimension. Demons, Chaos Abyss residents, gods, and angels died. The flames of war in the mortal plane had never been so intense before. The merciless god of holy light had never appeared on the battlefield so angrily before. His anger was also a sign of his power. There's not much time left. Yes, there wasn't much time left. Unlike what everyone expected, the dimensional door to the dimensional door had been activated 2 days ago. It was slowly opening. Only the god of holy light, who was under the control of the source of order, vigilantly discovered this problem. He intended to destroy this entire region at all costs in order to completely destroy this ticking time bomb that was bound to the world of Aishi. Cavendish didn't appear on this battlefield, because he knew that if he appeared, the god of holy light would do everything in his power to destroy him. However, Cavendish was still the mastermind behind all of this. The sly Chaos Abyss Prince's trick had worked. The first trap had been activated. The mechanical logical thinker unhesitatingly jumped into the trap with all of his power. The arrogant Holy Light faction didn't intend to call for reinforcements either. At this time, in order to stop a certain unpredictable factor, Carwens had also set up another trap, and this time, it was aimed at a mortal, F***CK. Something's wrong with this situation. I couldn't help but curse at the scene before me. I even had the urge to turn around and run. I passed through the endless sea of flames. What I saw wasn't an erupting volcano, nor was it the boiling Earth's core. Instead, I saw a familiar scene. A familiar street, a familiar house, and a familiar person. A silver-haired half-demon wearing black and white maid attire was waiting for me in front of my old residence in Sulphur Mountain City. What was slightly different was that I had always ridiculed her for being a waste of looks and always forcing herself to be serious. But now, she had a playful smile that was difficult to understand. "Master, welcome home." What made me feel like something was wrong was the maid before me. How could the Chaos Abyss Prince possibly attack and kidnap her? She was far more powerful than any main god I had ever met. Chapter 803. Men would always have their own little hobbies. When you returned home after a busy day and were so tired that you wanted to just lie down on the street, a cute girl wearing a lace-made outfit would greet you at your door with a sweet smile. "Master, welcome home. Would you like to eat first, or take a bath first, or, cough, cough?" All men would understand the rest. I admit that I was a complete maid lover, but a man should always have some hobbies. If a man isn't a pervert, can he still be considered a normal man? Back in the day, I confidently said this and asked Eliza to welcome me and wake me up every day. Of course, it was the healthy version. What could I possibly do when I was just a skeleton? However, I would never forget the icy expression in her eyes when she looked at me. What followed was an entire month of cold violence. In fact, in order to make her obediently wear a maid outfit every day, not only did I threaten her with raising me, I even nearly kneeled down and hugged her legs. Cough, cough, did I say anything? From a certain standpoint, fine. From a gentlemanly standpoint, Eliza's education was a complete failure. I really don't understand. She was clearly so cute and obedient when she was young. How did she become an iron virgin like Marguerite when she grew up? All these years, apart from when she was still a little girl, she would always do whatever I told her to do. She would always smile sweetly and say things like "welcome home," Master, be careful on your way home." But when she became slightly more mature, her childhood memories became a dark history that would immediately go berserk whenever I mentioned them. Now, the familiar iciness in her silver eyes had melted. She lifted her skirt and said my favorite line in her sweet voice. She was perfect in both appearance and attitude. She was basically the perfect maid that I could only dream of. However, I felt chills running down my back as goosebumps appeared all over my body. This time, perhaps I'm really going to die. 10 minutes later, I was lying in my home's courtyard and enjoying myself. I felt even more dazed as I looked at the familiar scenery around me. I wasn't some newbie who had never seen anything grand before. I had seen many domains and environments, and I had also seen more than 100 soul worlds that were incredibly different from reality. However, the old residence before me was exactly the same as what I remembered. It was completely real. The black pearl grapes growing on the grapevine behind him were rare magical plants. They were bitter and unpleasant to eat, but when brewed into wine, not only would they taste abnormally delicious, they would also have the miraculous effect of suppressing souls. Furthermore, they were an extremely rare magic potion ingredient. Black pearl wine was one of the few foods that high-level undead could enjoy. In order to successfully grow it, I had spent a lot of effort. This garden was set up for it, but if I moved it away from its original location, it would have instantly withered. But now, those small and black grapes were exactly the same as in my memory. The most incomprehensible part wasn't the magical plant itself, but the rack under the grapevine. The leftmost pillar had over 100 knife cuts on it. That was the path of a certain someone's growth. And now, it was exactly the same as it had been in the past. The appearance of an illusion and the projection of a soul world would have certain requirements for the controller. Only the controller would know and remember things in their soul worlds. Even if things weren't like that in reality, as long as one's obsession was strong enough, one would be able to change reality. But looking at it from a different perspective, if the controller didn't know and didn't pay attention, they would naturally miss out on such things. The familiar bitter taste of Requiem wine danced on the tip of my tongue. Requiem wine was poisonous to the living, but I sank into my memories. There were many small details that Eliza couldn't possibly have noticed back in the day, but now they were all right in front of me. It was as if she was truly in control of the world. I had never even heard of such an ability before. The current Eliza was becoming more and more unfathomable to me. Stop guessing. This is my old residence in Sulphur Mountain City. I took a trip there and directly brought it out. Cough, cough. You should have told me earlier. I almost choked to death. I spat out a mouthful of blood. At this moment, only the word embarrassment could be seen on my face. After I calmed down and took one last look at this familiar scenery, I felt even more reluctant to leave. How could this girl be so wasteful? Wouldn't everything be destroyed if we started fighting? This was my old home. That's right, if we started fighting, I knew from the moment I saw Eliza that it would be impossible for things to end peacefully. Not only had I been tricked, I had been tricked by the person I trusted the most. But some things still had to be faced in the end. Eliza, no, Cynthia, when did you start to ally with Cavendish? I laughed as I asked this question with anger in my voice. I hoped for a negative answer, but sometimes, reality was so cruel. The Eliza before me was far more powerful than any main god I had ever met. There was only one possibility for her inconceivably powerful strength. She, Eliza, was the victorious Chaos Girl. She was the new Chaos Goddess Cynthia. Cavendish was hunting Chaos Girls in order to have the chosen Chaos Girl become the true Cynthia and obtain the power of the Creator Goddess. I had originally thought that the chosen Chaos Girl would be one of the Devil Lords, Harloy's mother, or Leona. After all, a Chaos Girl becoming Cynthia wasn't a personality change. Rather, it was an individual who had devoured another main god using the law of the jungle to improve in all aspects. If I had been in Cavendish's position, I would naturally have helped my own people benefit. But now, Eliza had become the new Cynthia. There was only one explanation for this. After the War of the Hades, he came to find me, and we formed an alliance based on certain benefits. To be honest, your younger brother is much easier to deal with. I finally understood why Eliza had been missing for so long recently. Once the Chaos Girls began hunting, the rapidly evolving Eliza would naturally expose everything if she appeared in front of me. In that case, the betrayal had been going on for at least 10 years. Perhaps a lot of information hadn't been leaked by the Chaos Abyss Bloodline Kings. Perhaps my secretary was the highest-level spy in the Chaos Abyss. I became more and more confused, and even angry. Common benefits. What common benefits would Cavendish and Eliza have? Opening the dimensional door would be a good thing for a bastard like Cavendish who loved to see the world in chaos. But what benefits would Eliza gain? Did she forget all the lore that I had taught her back in the day? Did she understand that becoming a demon would make her agree with demons' foolish worldview and the law of the jungle? Your younger brother feels that you'll be a hindrance, so he wants to restrict you, especially since he knows what you intend to do. As for me, what do you think I want the most? Eliza was sitting in front of me. Her cheeks were red from the alcohol that she wasn't used to drinking. A cool breeze blew past, and her long silver hair flowed in the wind. However, I was rather astonished by her words. I paused. What Eliza wanted? Perhaps I had never thought about it before. What do you want? Ever since we were young, I've given you anything you wanted. If you need anything, you can just tell me directly. What can Cavendish give you? Roland. What? Why was she calling my name at this time? However, the silly cat's claws on my head were causing my scalp to hurt. You've probably never thought about why I'm willing to give up everything to follow you. I sank into contemplation upon hearing this. Perhaps it was because I was already used to her following me, but I had indeed never thought deeply about the reason for her loyalty. She still spoke in a calm tone, but the trembling of her wine glass revealed the excitement in her heart. Eliza took a deep breath and decided to tell me everything. Ruling the world. Saving the world. The law of honor. Undefeatable power. What meaning do all these things have to a woman? Why do you think a woman like me would risk my life so much, to the point of entering the chaos abyss and even devouring a disgusting demon's heart? Even if I was a pig, I should have an answer by now. However, I was unable to accept such an answer. Idiot, I'm a woman. Of course what I want is a woman's happiness. Roland, Cavendish's promise is to give Roland to me forever, eternally, and only. And now, you've come as expected. Harloy's face was filled with a mysterious blush of embarrassment. However, my current expression was filled with the word embarrassment. As I expected, the silly cat's sigh seemed like a belated statement. Chapter 804. Cavendish, you skipped class again? You're dead for sure this time. Kelly's really angry. Memories of the past always made me reminisce. Even now, I could still remember that Cavendish had never been a good student. The Mist Kingdom back then wasn't rich at all. However, the royal family's homework was quite heavy because of this. Culture, politics, economics, and diplomacy. Sometimes, the endless homework would give me a headache, not to mention the fun and active Cavendish. Since he was a member of the royal family, and the tutor's ruler wasn't heavy enough, it was quite common for him to skip class. And every time he skipped class, I would be the one to find him in the end. No matter if it was on the roof of the royal palace, in a corner of the military camp, or even in the backyard of a certain noble's daughter, I would always be able to quickly find him, as if I already knew where he was. By the way, wasn't it a bit too early for him to run into a group of women at this time? She's just good at talking. All she has to do is act pitiful and cute, and she'll easily pass. I felt rather helpless. Perhaps this was the reason why Cavendish always had such a good relationship with others despite being so mischievous. Whenever a group of noble daughters walked over, they would always pinch Cavendish's little face and joke around with him, allowing him to take advantage of them. And if it was me, I would definitely respectfully bow to him and then quickly run away. Even though we all have the same face, why is there such a difference in treatment? I also want to act pitiful and take advantage of her. Get along well with the citizens. But reality was cruel. While Cavendish was famous for being a playboy in the royal court, causing trouble and enjoying life, I only had a boring tin can and an even more boring middle-aged minister by my side. Even though I worked hard in all aspects, and my grades were quite good as well, it was precisely because I had an adult's mind that I was unable to act cute that I didn't get along with others. Even now, I still remembered that when I said this, that brat looked at me with pity for quite a while before saying, "No, no. No, no, it's just that our future king, Prince Roland, doesn't understand the human heart at all." At that time, I had planned to use the iron fist of elder brother's love to teach him what it meant to be a person's heart. After realizing that I couldn't beat him, I used Big Sis Kelly. Cavendish said that as long as he acted pitiful, he wouldn't be punished. He even said that you were easy to fool to let Cavendish know what it meant by the sinister hearts of adults. Thus, a certain someone was miserable. The number of classes he missed doubled. Kelly and I were watching over him when he tried to skip classes next month. He didn't succeed even once. But now, I still remember what Cavendish said after that. He only said it once. "Roland, your thoughts are like delicate gears that are full of delicate calculations and rules. You count the limits and contributions of human beings as a necessity on paper. Although it is reasonable, it always makes me uncomfortable. As a king, there's really no point in scheming so much. The entire country will be yours in the future. You only need to meet the needs of others when necessary. The basic necessities of life will be met. Slogans and beliefs will give them the motivation to take action." This was the advice of a younger brother to an older brother. Although I listened to it and tried to change, it was difficult to change a person's nature. A few words were unable to change an adult's habits of thought. But this also made me change my opinion of Cavendish. It wasn't that he didn't have a brain. He was just too lazy to use it. With me, his older brother, as the scapegoat, he was happy to become a heartless second prince. Perhaps, this kind of role was the most harmonious within the royal family. Ambitious schemers and political investors wouldn't be able to find any loopholes to stir up trouble. Of course, it was difficult to change a person's habits. After not using his brain for a long time, Cavendish was indeed becoming more and more brainless. But sometimes, he would have a flash of inspiration at a crucial moment and would always be able to grasp the crux of the matter. Sometimes, I would ask for his opinion and mock him for having the instincts of a wild animal. Yet, he would always mysteriously repeat the same sentence. "That's because you don't understand the human heart." "But I do." Then, I would continue to use all kinds of small tricks to torment him, leaving him with nowhere to use his strength. I would once again understand the viciousness of the human heart. But this time, it seemed that I was the one at a disadvantage. Damned Cavendish, I've been tricked. Was it human nature to satisfy the desires of those who desired it? I felt that this was nothing more than sophistry. However, Cavendish managed to stir up the entire world with this simple scheme and his understanding of the human heart. As the god of evolution, Sophocles desired to evolve, so he gave Sophocles evolution. The god of holy light was only a puppet of the source of order, so Sophocles gave Sophocles a reason to fall into his trap. As for me, Sophocles probably saw through my weakness of not being on guard against the people around me. Perhaps even Eliza wasn't the only candidate. Perhaps Sophocles had treated Renee so well because he had considered this day. Then, he unhesitatingly gave up on Renee only because Eliza had already agreed to cooperate with him. My plans were usually incredibly complicated. I would use the overall situation to slowly lure my opponents into my trap. Even if it was a scheme, it would be an overt scheme. Personal thoughts. That would be meaningless in front of the overall situation. Cavendish's methods were incredibly simple. He would simply make the most important person do the most important thing. Just 2 or 3 actions would be enough to give me a huge headache. Perhaps I had been so passive recently because deep down in my heart, I was still unable to view him as a mortal enemy. In a way, this was a type of hopeless naivety. I also knew that this was a flaw in my personality. However, some things were difficult to fix even if you knew they were wrong. Cavendish had made critical decisions. With someone who understood me so well, like Eliza, helping me, it was no wonder that I had been so passive recently. And, he indeed had a powerful bargaining chip in his hands. Even if I knew what it was, I wouldn't be able to promise her the same thing. What a grand scheme. You sent so many demons to invade the fire elemental plane just to lure me into your trap. We both believe that it's worth it if we can avoid the worst possible outcome. Eliza continued refilling my wine glass. She wasn't afraid to say words of betrayal at all. Perhaps she had long since anticipated that this day would come. My headache kept increasing. I was no idiot. Since they wanted to restrict me, that could only mean one thing: we had miscalculated Cavendish's progress. Now was the most critical moment for opening the door to the fire elemental plane. This wasn't what we had expected at all. Cavendish still needed to collect Chaos Girls to create Cynthia and obtain the power to open the door. He had attacked Amelia in order to give me the misconception that he wasn't ready yet. But just by looking at Eliza's current situation, I knew that he had long since been ready. Such trickery wasn't something Cavendish was used to. In fact, it was quite similar to what I was used to. I now knew who had been scheming against me behind my back. She never appeared in front of me, so I was only worried about her. Why would I be on guard against her? Should I exclaim that Eliza had already surpassed her master? The wine bottle was already empty. Eliza casually shook it and refilled it. She wanted to pour more wine, but this time, I took back my empty glass. There's not much time left. I sighed as I stood up and gripped my sword. That's right, there wasn't much time left. Their actions had already given the signal that the fire elemental plane would be more likely to open the door to the fire elemental plane with every minute that passed. I couldn't stay here even if I had to fight with my family. Roland, I'm only doing this for your own good. I know. I'm grateful. I silently unsheathed my Dawn Holy Sword. This was my choice. My sword's edge trembled slightly, revealing the confusion in my heart. Perhaps nobody expected that such a day would come. I would actually draw my sword against the youngest daughter that I had always wanted to protect. Roland, you don't understand the human heart. She spoke calmly as tears flowed down her cheeks. But this time, I was unable to wipe them away for her. Yes, I'm truly sorry. I'm afraid that I'll never understand the human heart for the rest of my life. Chapter 805. Snowflakes kept falling, and the snow swiftly covered the ground. It was as if a naughty child was waving a crayon, and the entire world turned white. I exhaled a white breath as I blankly looked at everything in front of me. The mountains were all white. The moment that I unsheathed my sword, the entire world changed into this. A boundless snowfield extended to the end of the horizon, and a frozen waterfall hung above an icy lake. The distant snow mountain seemed like the background, but it felt so close to me. Eliza. Harlois. A strange sense of space replaced my view of the world. Now that I was the only one left in this world, everything returned to peace. It was so quiet and cold. I wasn't used to such a world that had nothing at all. I took a step forward, and only the sound of my foot stepping into the snow was heard. Is anyone there? My shout was answered with "Is anyone there?" echoing in the snowy mountains. I tried to be on guard against such a world, but I was unable to focus. My instincts told me that there was no danger here, that I was the only one here, and that this was a safe haven for me alone. What evil spell is this? I was unable to understand what sort of spell could instantly trap me in such a place. A soul world? No, I didn't sense any source of magic. A teleportation spell? Forcefully teleporting me was basically impossible. Everything was real. That was even more impossible. I had just been in a world of fire with infinite flames, and I was facing the current fire elemental god. It was even more impossible for me to be in such a place. Such a land of ice and snow wasn't suitable for fire elemental creatures. In fact, it was even more suitable for ice mags like me, eh? Only now did I discover that I wasn't holding my familiar lightsaber, but a transparent ice blade instead. This was a crystalline long sword, with a blade of 2.5 inches that surpassed common sense. The streamlined blade had no decorations at all, and its natural curvature had a strange beauty to it. It had no decorations whatsoever, and its transparent blade was as thin as a cicada's wing. It made me wonder if it would shatter into pieces the slightest touch. It was more like a work of art than a weapon. However, the slight chill it gave off reminded me that this ice sword, the magic sword of the Northlands, was definitely a vicious weapon. It didn't have a hilt, and the entire blade was a blade. Unknowingly, the right hand that held the sword was already covered in blood. Before the blood dripped to the ground, it had already turned into red snowflakes. Drops of blood flowed down the blade, and cold air surrounded the blade, attracting everyone's attention. This is an ominous sword. I instinctively knew that this sword longed for life, no matter if it was the enemy's or my own. The price for its existence in this world was the sacrifice of life. Stabbing the sword into the snow, I sat down begrudgingly. I looked at the endless snow and the white clouds in the sky. Bewildered, I lay down in the snow. Looking at this sword, I finally understood. It wasn't some strange spell that had brought me here. I had brought myself here on my own accord. The reason? So I'm just a coward. I've already come to my senses. Can people deceive themselves? I had always thought that it was possible. After all, if you told too many lies, it would naturally become true. But this time, it seemed that I had gone too far. Perhaps even this sword was more honest than I was. It had chosen the most unacceptable method for me: escape. I had originally thought that my magic sword Northlands would require some more time to complete. After all, I had never been able to describe the truest Northlands in my heart. But now, it would seem that the only thing I lacked was a bit of emotion. Despair. Pain. Confusion. Resolution. I couldn't be sure which emotion had helped me complete this sword. After all, the Northlands didn't lack such emotions. But I knew that I definitely wouldn't thank it. Escaping would be meaningless. Delaying the arrival of pain would only make waiting for the arrival of pain a type of torture. What would come would eventually come. Even though my power level had clearly increased along with the completion of my sword, and this magic sword's power far exceeded my expectations, this didn't make me feel happy at all. Since it had just been born, why would it ask me to make a choice? Had it sensed my inner anxiety? Or had it lost control of its power after completing its own? Alright then, knowing the reason was meaningless, that's enough. Let me out. I had never expected that there would be a day when I would have to speak to my own sword. But, what made me feel helpless was that my words were meaningless. I said, that's enough. I've resolved myself. Let me out. I was suppressing a mysterious anger. Was it directed at my sword, or at myself for being so useless? Time passed bit by bit, but this boring scenery didn't change at all. My anxiety transformed into a burning flame that burned in my chest. Don't be a busybody, you're just a sword. You're nothing. You're just a part of me. You can't make decisions for me. Open it. What you're doing right now is meaningless. Even though I knew that words would be meaningless, my mysterious anxiety transformed into angry roars that reverberated throughout the snowy mountains. Finally, everything returned to normal. In this world of ice and snow where only I existed, I was doing meaningless things. Finally, the flames of my anxiety were extinguished. Every minute that passed made the countdown to Armageddon move even further. The Armageddon clock ticked. Confusion and fear mixed together. 4 or 5 hours had been wasted just like that. My angry roars transformed into whispers of begging. Please, open it. The next instant, the entire world disappeared. I no longer saw the snowy mountains, but instead my familiar home. Had my magic sword reached its limit? Or was there no turning back now? However, the scene in front of me was slightly abnormal. My maid was currently using a meteor hammer. I meant that she was grabbing my cat's tail and vigorously shaking it. Judging from the cat's pitiful screams, it seemed that I hadn't been gone for long. Roland, save me. Why did you disappear in an instant? Where did you go just now? How long was I gone for? 2 or 3 minutes. Stop wasting time. Hurry and save me. There's ice droplets on your face in the shape of tears. Could it be? That's just your imagination. Do you still want me to save you? I speedily wiped my face as I didn't know what to say anymore. It would seem that this magic sword's power far exceeded my expectations. I was rather afraid, as well as regretful. Finally, my fear transformed into joy. At the very least, I hadn't made an irreversible choice. After several hours alone in this world of ice and snow, my constantly changing emotions helped me to completely calm down. A future with only one path? No, I had always believed that there was no such thing as a hopeless situation in this world. Even in despair, there would still be endless hope. It was just that we didn't grit our teeth and persevere until the moment when things changed for the better. We didn't find that only hope. A world of despair? A scene of despair? It's not like I've never experienced despair before. Facing the Armageddon with a sad expression doesn't suit me to begin with. As long as there's still a sliver of hope. No, even if there's no hope at all, I'll still force my way out. Chapter 806. After I returned from the land of ice and snow, my impulses and emotions finally returned to being rational. That type of plot where the entire world owes you a tragedy or something like killing a younger sister to prove the Tao doesn't suit me at all. Even if it's the hell difficulty, I'll always try everything I can to achieve victory. That's always been my style. But sometimes, when my passion faded and reality appeared before me, no matter how much I prepared myself mentally, the cruel reality would still teach me how to be a person. And now, the most merciless reality was right in front of me. I can't beat her. I have no chance of winning at all. That's right, after my passion froze and I analyzed the current situation rationally, the most serious problem appeared. I had no chance of winning at all against the Eliza before me. For me, combat was nothing more than a competition of information and power level. Some preferred overwhelming power, while others preferred to obtain information and use targeted strategies and fighting styles to obtain victory. And I was doubtlessly the latter. Before every battle, I would gather information and prepare targeted strategies and trump cards in order to weaken my opponent and obtain victory. But this time, I had already lost quite a few points in terms of information since I hadn't made any preparations at all. Most of my understanding of Eliza was from 10 years ago. And after she transformed into a demon, she didn't want to talk about her own abilities, so there was no need for me to ask. Plus, Eliza had the basic abilities of a Chaos Girl, a demon main god, and a fire elemental god. It could be said that Eliza's past information was completely outdated. However, it was likely that Eliza would know quite clearly what abilities I had, what I was good at, what bad habits I had, what combat styles I had, and what flaws I couldn't change. The worst part was that I had completely explained my understanding of combat and my abilities to Eliza when I taught her. In that case, not only did she know about my abilities, she also likely knew about my combat choices and habits. This was quite fatal. It could be said that I scored 0 points in terms of information preparation and combat preparation, while Eliza scored full points. But that wasn't even the most fatal part. Honestly, I can't see any chance of winning at all. Previously, I mentioned that Eliza was stronger than any main god I had ever met. That wasn't a meaningless description. The current Eliza was the main god of the fire elemental plane, as well as a survivor of the Chaos Girls. I didn't know exactly how much of the Chaos Girl's memories and power she had obtained, but just her aura alone already surpassed what I previously believed to be the strongest main god, Sophocles. And the most shameless part of all, yes, absolutely shameless. She was the elemental god of this dimension, which meant that she could obtain an endless amount of power through the elemental throne. It would never be possible for her to run out of power. And if she died in battle, she would be able to swiftly revive, unless she was like Lorcan, who directly dug out his elemental throne. But this time, I hadn't made any preparations at all. I didn't even know where the elemental throne was. With Lorcan as an example, the elemental throne would definitely be well hidden. It would be impossible for me to find it immediately. I can't see any possibility of victory. I couldn't see any possibility of victory in terms of mana and magic. As for melee combat, even if I didn't consider Eliza's ridiculously powerful combat techniques, it would still be impossible for me to win in a melee combat against a demon main god and an elemental god. Sweat dripped down my face as the maid in front of me continued to remain silent. However, I was unable to find an opening to attack at all. That little bastard Carwens had set up an impossible situation for me to overcome. Master, please don't act rashly. Otherwise, rather than being destroyed forever, Having you return to the Gui Ming River for a few months of vacation might be a better option. Even my undying nature had been seen through. How was I supposed to play? Her silent eyes were filled with a faint killing intent. She had already made up her mind. I hadn't even made up my mind to kill her. She was already prepared for the worst possible outcome. Plus, there was a huge difference in power level and information between us. It was impossible to see any possibility of victory in such a battle. Fighting and killing is so hurtful. How about we play a game of chess and guess a riddle? You'll let me leave if I win. I tried saying something that even I didn't dare to believe. However, Eliza chuckled. I already knew that you would say that. And then, a three-dimensional chessboard with hundreds of silver and gold chess pieces appeared in front of us. A game of mage chess with 500 chess pieces? It even comes with a map of another world. Every living chess piece can replace a battle group. A super precious item that can simulate a world war at home? I've always wanted to play. Did you really think that I would say that? By the time we finish this game, it'll probably be the end of the world already. From a certain standpoint, my heart was bleeding. The modern version of mage chess would at most have 3 continents with 100 chess pieces. These chess pieces were capable of simulating multiple dimensions, so they would definitely be treasured by some powerful individual. But if we started playing, not to mention 1 or 2 days, it would take several months to simulate a world war. Then how about a riddle? I have the complete set of Hermit Rice conjectures, 9th Circle Mage selections, and Goblin Engineer Level 4 exam questions. Shall I go first? Eliza miraculously took out a dozen books from her maid's skirt. As expected, maid's skirts were dimensional bags that contained everything. Hermit Rice, a certain deranged mathematician, had left behind so many ancient puzzles that would drive a genius mathematician insane. As for my mathematical knowledge, did I mention that I didn't need to learn advanced mathematics in law school? The only thing I had confidence in about Hermit's conjectures was that I would absolutely not be able to understand the questions. As for the remaining magic and goblin exams, I had heard of both of them before. The former was a necessary exam to become a high-level mage, while the goblins used it to torment foreign engineers who came to study. There were even questions like what's the goblin's favorite food? How many children can goblins give birth to? Being able to answer these questions didn't depend on one's knowledge or reasoning. Instead, it depended on one's boredom and whether or not one was capable of controlling goblins. And the most important part was that even if I solved these questions, Eliza, can you guarantee that you'll let me go after I solve these questions? Of course. I can't. Nobody could guarantee that the other party would keep their promises, especially since I had never treated keeping promises as a virtue. I would only teach this concept to the person before me. Once again, I experienced the pain of shooting myself in the foot. The smiling maid sealed off all of my escape routes. Even though I clearly had the upper hand in this battle, I instinctively felt that as long as I attacked, I would instantly be the one to be beaten to the ground. Escape. Where would I escape to? This was the fire elemental plane, and my opponent was the master of this plane. How could I possibly escape? My power level was completely suppressed, and my information was exposed. My opponent had the geographical advantage, and she could even summon reinforcements at any time to replenish her mana and revive. The current me had no chance of victory. Idiot, you still need to rely on us at such a critical moment. I paused in surprise at the silly cat's words. Only now did I recall that she seemed to have long since predicted that things would develop to such a state. Could it be that she had long since prepared for this? Us. Who else? The next instant, my doubts were answered. Above the silly cat's head, a seed was swiftly sprouting. It instantly transformed into a rose that was as tall as me. The familiar green-haired beauty then walked out of the rose. At the same instant, an icy killing intent spread from my feet all the way to my back. At this moment, the smiling maid before me finally had a true killing intent. Chapter 807. While Roland was trapped in the fire elemental plane, the chaos battlefield in the mortal plane was also in chaos. The heavenly gods died one after another, and the angels were as weak as little chicks. The chaotic dimension was gradually smoothed out, and the furious god of holy light gradually found his target. However, the price for this was golden-colored divine blood that covered this entire dimension. Just like in the past, order and chaos fiercely clashed once again. Evolution? That might not be the case. However, the fact that the venerated major figures of the past had died for nothing was quite ironic. Of course, certain existences might think that it was worth it. The chaotic space was like an ocean in a storm. Fatal undercurrents and hidden reefs were everywhere. The chaotic space and cracks were even more fatal than any death trap. In a normal situation, the Order angels and gods would have their own power to gradually repair the distortions and cracks. But right now, what they lacked the most was time. At every moment, there were powerful existences falling on the battlefield. They were the sacrifices of this battle, and they belonged to both sides. The scattered divine souls, divine blood, divine concepts, and divine power of the dead Order gods gradually neutralized this distorted area, paving the way to attack the door in the crystal wall. Was this really a waste? Perhaps not in the eyes of both sides participating in this battle. The ancient bronze dimensional door was devouring all the sacrifices. The two statues of the goddess of life on both sides of the door were slowly opening their eyes. Their lips were slightly open as if they were saying something. The goddess of order on the right was elegant and noble. Her white robe was like a work of art. Her long golden hair glowed brilliantly, and her dark blue eyes flashed with wisdom and compassion. The white wings on her back trembled slightly. She put her hands together and prayed. Her eyes were filled with sorrow as if she couldn't bear to see the pitiful state of the world. The goddess of chaos on the left was devilishly beautiful. She had short black hair, and her eyes shone with red light. Her red eyes were black, and the whites of her eyes were rather frightening. The two horns on her forehead were cute and mischievous rather than vicious. Unlike her older sister with two wings, Cynthia only had one demon wing on her left. She wasn't wearing female clothing either. Instead, she wore bright red armor. Her classic armor only protected her vitals. She held a red spear and eagerly entered the battlefield. Her valiant posture made her seem more like a goddess of war than a demon lord. At this moment, Cynthia had a smile on her lips as she looked at everything before her in delight. She seemed to be satisfied with the abundant offerings, or perhaps she was even more satisfied with the battles that pleased her. This was probably the first time that the Gemini goddesses had ever appeared in front of a younger generation. Yet, they were astonishingly similar to their creations. However, he probably wasn't in the mood to admire the goddess of holy light's appearance. Carwens, who would usually go into battle lightly, was now wearing heavy armor for once. He was armed to the teeth. After all, he was about to face the publicly acknowledged strongest existence in this world, the god of holy light. Even though the god of holy light had been weakened multiple times, and even though he had lost multiple clones, the weakened god of holy light was still the strongest main god in the mortal plane. The god of holy light had thousands of years of faith in the holy light, and billions of devout believers had given him the power of faith. The god of holy light, who had no sense of self, was still publicly recognized as the strongest in the mortal plane. The slowly rising sun caused Cavendish to end his hibernation and prepare to face the holy light faction's attack. Not only did he not hesitate or worry when facing a powerful enemy that was theoretically impossible to defeat, he even had an expression of excitement. It was as if he had been waiting for this day for a long time. I'll say this first, Roland is mine. I'm going to test out the power level of the previous generation's Chaos Child. Donates didn't receive a response to his words. However, the existences standing next to him were naturally at the peak of the world as well. Demons, devils, undead, dragons, humans, dark cultists, and fanatical believers. This was probably the most diverse group in the world. Their leaders' excitement doubtlessly boosted their fighting spirits. However, not everyone was in high spirits as they welcomed the end of their plan. Donates, who longed for battle, was currently rather listless as he coldly watched everything unfold before him. He would occasionally glance at Cavendish with a complex expression. However, he was still heavily injured, so he probably didn't have any other choice. The ghost that stole the god of holy light's heat and life stood by herself in front of the door. She seemed to be studying the carvings on the door and had no intention of participating in the battle. For her, taking revenge on Roland was her only goal. But judging from how her eyes kept flashing with confusion and contemplation, even she wasn't able to convince herself with this reason. Meanwhile, the other undead emperor seemed to have been injured by the god of holy light's holy light and was currently doing his best to erase all traces of his existence. Sharpness, who had entered the mortal plane with great ambitions, was currently squatting in a corner with a depressed expression. He probably regretted coming to this world. Although he had survived the previous battle, he probably wouldn't have stayed here if he had any other choice. The demons, high-level undead, and devils who had survived the previous battle were all the same. Since they were unable to leave this dimension, and the holy light gods and angels attacked, their species and identities determined that they had to fight for their survival. Since the Chaos faction and Order faction were about to start their final battle, the other residents of the mortal plane naturally wouldn't sit still and watch the situation worsen. Archmages and Druil weren't useless. They had their own understanding of the world. Even though the arrogant Holy Light faction remained silent, the fact that the dimensional door was opening rapidly spread throughout the mortal plane. Numerous floating airships, flying magical beasts, and dragons silently flew into the sky. They followed the path that the Holy Light faction had opened up and entered the battlefield. The passengers on these airships were quite diverse. There were humans, elves, beastmen, dragons, undead, mags, gnomes, and even gods from other divine factions. Some sent their clones, incarnations, or personally participated. Since the end of the world was about to arrive, nobody would be able to quietly wait at home for everything to happen, even if they were an undying god. Although the nature faction didn't have any god kings, their strangely shaped nature divine beasts were already carrying more than a dozen high-level gods. Even though they had lost contact with Roland, the hell dragons still started moving. The gigantic bone airship between them was a super monstrous airship that was covered in the aura of death and hell. It also had the aura of a god. The gods and beasts in the ocean finally left their holy lands. They were being carried by gigantic magical whales and seashells as they slowly moved forward. The cloud castle was also moving slowly. Its main power source had been almost completely destroyed in the previous battle, but it still appeared on the front lines. It was just that it seemed rather awkward to be dragged along by the dragons and beasts. Elemental creatures also appeared in the sky. The wind elemental lords and earth elemental lords who would normally fight each other whenever they saw each other were actually able to peacefully coexist on the same airship. They were definitely not the only exceptions. Amidst this abnormal calm, amidst the pressure of the end of the world, the undead and angels were also able to travel together. Holy light priests were able to peacefully chat with undead mags. The wood spirits also sent out their aerial fleet. Although the seven virtues were all present, their mother empress wasn't present. Strictly speaking, Amelia was also currently fighting for the sake of the mortal plane. It was just that the situation was slightly different. Oh my, isn't this the nutritious little brat who still hasn't graduated from her Oedipus romance? Just give up. Look at that cat, look at me. Don't you know what Roland likes? Even if you're not his daughter, it's still impossible. I was now rendered completely speechless. Sister, are you really here to help me and not to make things difficult for me? Why are you taunting me right from the start? Don't even compare your breast. Eliza is about to go berserk. Also, silly cat, stop showing off your adult body at such a time. Chapter 808. Roland, there's not much time left. The door is opening. My system, which had been becoming ever more silent recently, was urging me on. Ever since Cavendish's scheme was exposed, she had become ever more silent. Could it be that she was feeling guilty and doubting her actions from back then? But with my understanding of her, that shouldn't be the case. Can you stop him? No matter what, he should only have the same level of authority as Cynthia. If I was in my complete form, I could directly close the door. But right now, I'm nothing more than a lonely ghost that has lost my foundation. I'll try to stall for time, but don't have too much hope. After saying this, my system fell silent once more. But in the distant chaotic space, the goddess of order's opened eyes were slowly closing, and her arms were also closing. This caused the door to faintly lose its glow. The door's progress was delayed, but right after that, Cynthia's goddess of order statue glowed brightly with red light as energy flowed out and forcefully made up for what was missing. However, a faint humanoid figure could be seen on the statue's forehead, and it seemed to be howling in pain. It's actually possible to interfere. At the same time, Eliza was eavesdropping on my conversation. She looked at me with an even more hostile expression when she heard this. She finally lost her patience against the unrepentant Roland, as well as Amelia and Harlois who kept provoking her. Boom. The next instant, a fist met a palm, and two pairs of beautiful eyes glared angrily at each other. Eliza and Amelia were already fighting. But the strange thing was that neither of them had any intention of using any spells. Even though their energy levels were off the charts, they chose to directly engage in melee combat, which seemed like it didn't require any technique at all. The two beauties fought, but it didn't seem like entertainment at all. In fact, it was the opposite. Even the slightest contact would make one feel like they were either dead or injured. Eliza transformed her arms into claws as she started attacking relentlessly like a tidal wave. She seemed as fierce as a dragon, completely attacking without any defense. But actually, she was only attacking 30% and defending 40%, with 30% left to spare. However, she was constantly observing her opponent's weaknesses. The moment she discovered that her opponent revealed an opening, she would use her signature interlocking technique to deal a fatal blow to her opponent. Doesn't this look familiar? Perhaps in terms of individual strength, she had already surpassed her teacher, but her fighting style and philosophy were still inextricably linked to Roland. On the other side, Amelia's fighting technique was more simple and violent. Straight punches, heavy punches, hooks, simple punches, yet not even the sound of the wind could be heard. However, no one would doubt the terrifying power that came with those slender hands. Wherever her fists and feet passed, light would be distorted and space would faintly tremble. It was as if her brute force was enough to shatter the rules of space and tear a crack in space. Unlike normal combat, both Eliza and Amelia were dual cultivators of magic and martial arts. Neither of them used blades, and their melee combat techniques were all self-taught combat techniques that they had developed from basic mage self-defense spells. However, it was likely that even the strongest grandmaster of combat in the mortal plane would be instantly defeated by them. The reason? It was pure overwhelming power. Eliza and Amelia used magic to strengthen their physical bodies, obtaining inconceivable speed and strength bonuses. No matter how excellent one's technique was, if one's reaction speed couldn't keep up, or if one's strength couldn't keep up, one would still be forcefully crushed. Fighting techniques and sword techniques were fundamentally still techniques for using one's own physical body and weapon. If one sacrificed their life to use an ultimate technique, yet still couldn't compare to the opponent reflexively reaching out with a finger, no matter how skilled one's technique was, it would be impossible to make up for the foundational difference between the two individuals. Even in melee combat, Eliza and Amelia were still fighting at the main god level, just like how the Titan had defeated Donates in the past. As long as one's pure power was ridiculous enough, there would be no need for any tricks or demonic tricks. In front of a physical collision at the level of a star, all those colorful magical techniques would probably be nothing more than fireworks. It would seem that Eliza isn't as self-aware as she claims to be. I fell into deep thought as I watched the battle before me. It was quite normal for Amelia to choose melee combat. She was of the wood element, so it would be foolish of her to fight against Eliza, who was of the fire element, using magic. This was especially so since Eliza's physical strength originated from the earth, which was her strongest aspect to begin with. However, although Eliza's mage combat techniques were also quite good, they definitely weren't her strongest aspect. Her strongest aspect was probably the tremendous amount of magic that came from her dual identities as the Chaos Abyss and the Fire Elemental Goddess. She would use the same method to fight against Eliza, relying on the environment around her. Even if it was melee combat, Eliza's true body would likely be the same size as the other main gods. A gigantic body would be able to obtain greater strength and weight. Using her true body in melee combat would definitely be far more powerful than using a smaller body. No matter how much the dwarfs honed their fighting techniques, they would still be no match for a young Titan in melee combat. I looked around at the familiar streets, familiar houses, and familiar home. Not only were these things binding me, it would seem that even Eliza herself didn't care about these things binding her. At the very least, at this stage, these things were restricting her choices. Perhaps she had already resolved herself to destroy everything she treasured in the past in her battle against me. However, she would be unable to accept the price of losing her home against the outsider Amelia that she hated. Meanwhile, Amelia was far more sly. First, she provoked me verbally, then she started melee combat. Then, she intentionally affected the environment with her attacks. It was evident that she had already seen through everything. How despicable. But, I like it. Although I apologize, since you've already revealed an opening, I will naturally take advantage of this victory to attack. Of course, the restraining effect of home was limited. If this dragged on for too long, there would naturally come a time when Eliza would give up on everything. But judging from this, she would never be able to completely forget her emotions. In that case, what I needed to do was quite simple. Cavendish, that brat, truly understands people's hearts. The only reason why Eliza would do all this is because of her love for me. Fine then, silly cat, stop glaring at me. Love counts as well. In that case, can she really abandon everything else, including her friendships with others? I unhesitatingly took out a magical firework and tossed it into the sky. Originally, I really didn't intend to use this ambush. But perhaps at this time, if the goal was to stall Eliza so that I could leave, their appearance would be more useful than mine. I originally thought that it would take at least half an hour for them to arrive in this dimension after receiving the notification. I didn't expect that they would instantly respond. "Ha, you brat, you finally asked for reinforcements. I thought that it would take you a long time." The red dragon suddenly descended. Judging from her expression as if she was watching a show, she had been waiting for quite a while already. "You're so stubborn that you're going to suffer." Marguerite was quite calm. It seemed that she had long since known that the situation would develop to such a state. Since they were here, Adam was naturally here as well. But this guy. The power of fire in his body is too unstable. It's quite easy for Eliza to discover it, so we had him sleep. There was also a block of ice on the red dragon's back. The red-haired man was currently glaring angrily at me. Although what Marguerite said made a lot of sense, why did I feel like this guy couldn't bear to watch any longer and was about to jump out, only to be ambushed from behind? I had originally wanted them to be my backup to save Eliza, but why did it seem that they had arrived first? I was still astonished at why they were already prepared, but the silly cat's expression and Marguerite's next words caused me to fall silent to the point where I didn't know how to respond. "Don't blame Harlois and us for hiding things from you. Since we knew that the situation would develop to such a state, how could we possibly let you face it by yourself? You usually seem quite rational, but when it comes to such things, it's quite easy for you to be impulsive and fail. You'll always choose the path of self-torture. Although I don't know how you managed to calm down, if things had continued to develop like before, you definitely wouldn't have had a tragic ending." Marguerite's explanation sounded quite reasonable. However, I only felt incredibly embarrassed. In that case, my previous resolution and sadness were nothing more than a show I put on in front of my old friends. No matter if it's you killing Eliza and regretting it for the rest of your life, or if Eliza kills you, the two of you will end up becoming enemies. That's not something we want to see. That's why we've interfered. Don't blame us for being meddlesome. Didn't you all interfere with Adam Resolution a few years ago? Little Red also had a rare serious expression. I finally saw through everything. So they had long since confirmed what Eliza would do and made preparations for it. Only I, who was closely involved in the situation, didn't see everything clearly. Imperceptibly, Eliza and Amelia stopped fighting. Eliza had a complex expression as she glanced at Marguerite, Little Red, and Adam. Finally, her complex emotions transformed into a sigh. "Must you all stop me? Do you know what will happen if I don't stop Roland?" It'll be nothing more than Roland dying. Ha, we're all used to it. It doesn't matter. He's already died more than once. We're all used to things like self-destruction. He's just like a cockroach. Even though these guys were clearly on my side, their words made me so angry that I was grinding my teeth. It's different this time. He shares the same soul as Cavendish. Eliza questioned angrily, but the people in front of her just smiled at her. Didn't they know? The answer was obviously no. But, just like how Roland and Marguerite were unable to change Adam's resolve, they were unable to change Roland's resolve as well. Perhaps it should be said that it wasn't that they were unable to change it, but rather that they couldn't bear to change it. They weren't saying beautiful things like saving the world was more important than personal benefits. It was just that they knew that Roland would never be able to tolerate hiding and not facing everything. He would have to suffer in regret for a long period of time in the future. Compared to the true hell of the river Styx, living in a living hell of regret was far worse. Eliza fell silent. She understood the resolve of her old friends and seniors. However, all she wanted was for the man she loved to survive, even if he would be filled with endless years of regret and pain, even if Roland hated her for the rest of his life. In the end, her silence transformed into an offensive stance. Amidst the eruption of a sea of lava, my old residence was instantly reduced to rubble. Eliza, who hadn't said a single word, expressed her choice. Adam, who had finally been unfrozen, furrowed his eyebrows as he faced her. As Marguerite smiled in a strange manner, spatial magic flashed continuously, and I was forcefully teleported a certain distance away. All that was left behind was a sentence that I couldn't understand. We'll help you stall her for a while. In a cave 30 kilometers to the left, there's a teleportation portal that leads to the northernmost continent. When you get there, head in the direction of home, and you'll obtain what you want the most. Chapter 809. So, from the very start, I was the only one who didn't know anything. Perhaps even Adam and Marguerite saw things more clearly than I did. But there was one question. How did they learn the key to defeating Cavendish, as well as the secret of my undying nature? Eliza knew all this because Cavendish told her. But how did Adam and the others know? Actually, I knew the answer just by thinking about it. That was because there weren't many people in this world who knew about this. Silly cat, you should be thanking me, not questioning me. According to your logic, as long as the result is good, the process doesn't matter. What do you think would have happened if I hadn't made all these arrangements? What would have happened? Would I have spent so much effort to kill Eliza? Or would Eliza viciously kill me so that I could return to the river Styx to continue channeling? No matter what the result was, I wouldn't be able to accept it. So, Harlois, thank you so much for this. Yep, this was indeed the best result. I sincerely thanked Harlois. Asterisk plop. Asterisk however, the black cat fell off my head. She looked at me with an expression of astonishment and disbelief, as if she had seen a ghost. You're Cavendish in disguise, aren't you? Roland, that cold-blooded, twisted, neurotic, masochistic, overthinking, selfish father, maidservant, and Sunder Roland actually thanked someone. My eyebrows were no longer furrowed, but rather twisted. What was going on? Was this how the silly cat viewed me? At any rate, I'm really thankful to all of you. Even if I'm cold-blooded, crazy, masochistic, arrogant, servant-loving, and cat abuser, I know what's good for me. As for what you just said, I don't hold a grudge against you at all. Yep, not at all. Aren't you just cold-blooded, crazy, masochistic, arrogant, servant-loving, and cat abuser? Relax, I've already forgotten about it. Don't you remember it clearly? Wait a moment, why is there a cat abuser? What do you intend to do to me? The silly cat's screams echoed in my ears as I let go of the elemental lord's corpse that resembled a dead lizard king. Behind us, a sea of flames was chasing after us. Eliza was stopped by Adam, but countless fire creatures and elemental lords were summoned by the earth elemental god. They were willing to sacrifice their lives in order to stop me. The Northlands. He held the ice-cold long sword in his right hand, charged, dashed forward, drew the sword, and sheathed it. In front of the ice magic blade, The sturdy body that the magma giant was so proud of was easily sliced apart like butter being cut by a table knife. It was easily sliced apart, melted, and turned into pieces and remains. A domain of ice and snow covered everything around me. Although my Northland's magic sword hadn't activated its incredibly abnormal and powerful special effects, just the fact that it was a pure semigod ice magic sword meant that it was destined to be the natural enemy of all fire elemental creatures. From a certain standpoint, I wasn't used to using this long sword. Although strictly according to Aish's standards, this single-edged sword could also be considered a sword, a long sword of this length definitely wouldn't be suitable for infantry to use normally. Although an overly long sword would look cool, it would easily knock into unnecessary objects, making it incredibly inconvenient to use. If I tried to draw my sword, only to discover that the tip of my sword was stuck into the ground, and I couldn't pull it out even after a long time, I would be laughed at by my opponent. This was just an analogy, not a personal experience. Since the sword was too long and couldn't be pulled out from the ground, it would be far too stupid. It definitely wasn't something that I could do. Although it was quite fun to slash at large magma giants, fire dragons, and other large magical creatures, the overly long sword would actually become a hindrance if the enemy got too close to me. It just so happened that small and medium-sized enemies were the norm. I was getting a headache now. I had never practiced using a super long sword before. If I had half a month to practice, I would probably be able to use it quite well. But right now, the most precious thing was probably time. But now that I was facing a Fire Lord, I needed this magic sword's power of ice and snow. It would be nice if it could be shorter. Hey! What astonished me was that the instant this thought appeared in my mind, the magic sword suddenly shrunk. I kicked away a fire dwarf that approached me and pondered as I looked at the short sword in my hand. It would seem that this magic sword is even more useful than I expected, with even more potential to be unearthed. However, I'll probably need a lot of practice before I can get used to it. I smiled as I looked at the endless number of high-level fire creatures in front of me. Aren't there so many live targets for me to practice on? Shoot it down, divine spear. My sword suddenly lengthened, and I instantly skewered two fire elementals that were 30 meters away. As they returned to their elemental source, I suddenly clasped my hands together and swung my sword with all my might. My super long sword directly swept through all the fire elementals around me. How interesting. What should I do next? Scatter, Senbonzakura? Sit in a frozen sky, Icewheel Maru? Forget it, this seems rather difficult. I still need to learn more about it, so let's go with the simplest one. The red-faced monster in front of me actually dares to block me. What demon is it? Take this. I could sense that the intense battle behind me was constantly moving. Eliza was probably leading the battle forward. But judging from how Adam and the others were still brimming with mana, they should still be able to hold on. Meanwhile, my enemies weren't that strong. As I slaughtered them, the earth elemental lords and magical creatures that I had temporarily gathered also swiftly returned to the mortal plane. When I saw the one-time use dimensional door hidden in the cave, I hesitated. Marguerite had said that this was a dimensional door that led to the northernmost continent. If I entered it, who knew how long it would take to travel from the northernmost continent to Bardi? It was likely that it would take at least half a year. Such a waste of time would be worse than if Eliza kept me here. If they were using another method to restrict me, aren't you tired of thinking so much? I'm tired. There's no helping it. Let's just say that I was born cold-blooded, awkward, neurotic, self-masochistic, overthinking things, having a penchant for maids, being at sunder, and abusing cats. That's my nature, and it's impossible to change. You still remember. I've never seen a man as petty as you. That's because you've never met Rollo and Baron Blackhand. Don't try to fool me. I know that they're all your alternate identities. You're so petty. While chatting with the silly cat, I also finished the final preparations for the dimensional teleportation. There's no other way. Let's just treat the silly cat as a living cat. Although I said that, I still felt that this time, Adam and Marguerite wouldn't make things difficult for me, just like in the past. You're always so mysteriously confident in the people around you. You were just tricked just now. Can't you learn from that? I can't help it. That's just my nature. I can't change it. My words echoed in the cave. When everything returned to normal, there was no one left in the cave. 5 minutes later, the furious fire elemental god turned the cave and the volcano into ashes. Chapter 8:10. Sometimes, there was only a thin line between a volcano and an iceberg. Just a moment ago, it was so hot that I needed to bring my own air conditioner, but now it was so cold that I needed a stove. After casually slaying the great snow demons blocking my way, my path was now unobstructed. After a long and arduous trek, half an hour, I finally climbed to the top of this ancient snowy mountain that was rarely visited by humans. I had become the first conqueror of this ancient mountain range. Right now, I felt like something was wrong with this scene. Was this supposed to be an extreme adventure? I stood at the top of the snowy mountain as the morning sun slowly rose. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry as I gazed at the endless snowy plains around me, as well as the restless predators that were hiding in ambush. Even if I didn't use any GPS devices, just the frigid temperature alone was enough to make this the northernmost part of the continent a forbidden zone for life. Not only that, this freezing region was the northernmost part of the Asia continent, which was very close to the North Pole. Under normal circumstances, if I wanted to go to Bardi right now and immediately turn back, even if I swam across the frigid Borealis Sea, I would only be able to return to the Northlands, which would take me more than half a year. We'll help you stall her for a while. There's a teleportation portal that leads to the northernmost part of the continent in a cave about 30 kilometers to the left. Once you get there, head in the direction of home, and you'll obtain what you want the most. I didn't believe that Marguerite's vague instructions were meaningless. There were far too many mysteries in this world, and far too many mysteries couldn't be explained with words. Riddles were Mag's favorite because there were far too many unspeakable and inexplicable mysteries. It wasn't just to show off one's knowledge and wisdom, nor was it to trick others into paying money. Fine then, I was just saying that. At the very least, I always felt that those scammers and fortune-tellers had a habit of opening their mouths and not speaking the human language. This wasn't just a way of scamming people for money, it was more like a sick habit. The direction of home? According to the explanation on paper, my roots were in the Northlands, so of course my home was in the Northlands. Did that mean that I had to go south? But that was the normal route. I definitely wouldn't be able to go back the way I came. Could there be some other secret to this? Could it be that you have to go north? After all, the Northlands is the northernmost part of the world. The direction of home refers to the direction of your home in the entire world. This explanation was rather far-fetched, but Harloise's confident tone gave me some confidence. Silly cat. Do you know something? Meow, are you talking to a cat? All right, it was obvious that he was pretending to be confused. Was it a secret that he couldn't reveal? In that case, heading north was the correct choice. Was it the extreme north of the extreme north? What would be there? Since I had already determined the direction, I unhesitatingly spread my wings, bounced off the ground, and flew. I didn't fly. The result of blowing air into ice was that my wings instantly turned into ice cubes. And these 2 ice cubes wouldn't be able to fly. How did I jump up and how did I land? Fortunately, there was no audience, or it would be really embarrassing. They can't fly high even if they have wings. Polar penguins. So stupid. Alright then, I had forgotten that this silly cat would never forget to seize every opportunity to undermine me. But now, I needed to have the silly cat help me summon fire to melt this ice. Just as I prepared to fly into the air, Harloise transformed into her human form and seemed to have no intention of following me. You should go. That's a one-way street. Who told me to be nosy and ask about it? Now it's pointless for me to follow him. Is it a one-person teleportation portal? Or is it a teleportation portal that's impossible to enter after knowing about it? Meow. Are you asking Meow? I felt rather helpless as I watched Harloise transform back into her cat form and play dumb. But from a certain standpoint, this was an affirmative answer. Although I didn't know Harloise's reason, since she decided to stay, I also made my decision. I floated in midair and took one last glance before unhesitatingly spreading my wings and flying forward. Half an hour later, Harlois was still waiting here until the dimensional crack opened up again. The world of ice was melted by the high temperature, and the incarnation of fire transformed into a second sun. Harlois smiled as if she knew this would happen as she watched the incarnation of the fire god in the sky. Even they were only able to stop you for such a long time? Or is it that your main body is still being stopped, and only your incarnation is coming? The flames reformed into a human form. The beautiful fire god was now so angry that her veins were bulging. Judging from the fact that her incarnation of fire was still unable to take form, this was obviously only an incarnation. Fire god level existences would be impossible to kill unless they used their main body or entered other dimensions. And since they spent most of their time in the mortal plane using incarnations and clones, projecting an incarnation was already second nature to them. Using divine power to reverse engineer the target of a single-use spell formation and projecting an incarnation along the coordinates would only require time and divine power. However, one shouldn't underestimate the power of this incarnation. During the Holy War, the limit on incarnation's power had been lifted. As long as enough divine power was used, it was possible for an incarnation to be even stronger than the main body. And right now, Eliza was already inconceivably powerful. The incarnation that she had spared no effort in creating would definitely not be something that ordinary people could deal with. Her mere existence was changing the world. The ice and snow were forcefully melted, and the ice elemental spirits were expelled. Fire domains and lava appeared in places where they shouldn't appear. While the ice and snow were expelled by the flames, the entire world was being rewritten. Book racks appeared here one after another. The ice-cold snowy ground was instantly covered in luxurious purple crystal floorboards. The glorious library replaced the land of ice and snow. Harlois, who wore gold-rimmed spectacles and held a purple scepter, appeared in this sea of books while clutching a thick magical book. "Now then, little Eliza, allow me to play with you for a bit." This sentence completely ignited the entire battlefield. The human incarnation of fire was completely incinerated, transforming the entire world into a fiery hell. When fire magic exploded in the far north, I finally arrived at Asia's North Pole. The endless ice plains created the borders of the world. One step forward would be nothing but the void. I faintly sensed that this was perhaps an even more suitable dimensional door than Bardi. This is the end of the world. There's no path forward. But, in order to commend those who see this monument for their fearlessness and sacrifice, as well as for those who are fearless and don't take the boring path of turning back, you can all engrave your name and destination on this monument. You can engrave your name and destination on the monument, and I will use my supreme authority to send you there immediately. Looking at the names Adam and Marguerite at the end, I finally understood why they wanted me to come here but didn't say why. The moment I saw this gigantic monument, I instinctively reminded myself. This was an unexpected surprise and Easter egg that the Mother Goddess had left behind for her children. After I left this place, I couldn't tell anyone the truth about this place. I could invite them to explore this place as well, but I couldn't tell them just what kind of surprise was hidden here. It would be impossible for anyone to see this monument unless they reached this final step. If I told them the truth through some other method, then as an unromantic cheater, I would lose the right to receive a surprise gift. As for me, I counted as a newcomer who received an invitation from the previous adventurer. "Mother, this is a mark left behind by Mother." My system's screams filled my mind. This was the first time I had ever seen her lose her composure like this. When her screams turned into sobs, I didn't even know how to comfort her. But the current situation proved a certain fact. Since my system doesn't know about this place, then it's impossible for Cynthia to know, either. And if Cynthia doesn't know, then Cavendish and Eliza also wouldn't know about this place. Time was precious. I should have directly said something like go to the Bardi Chaos Dimension, but this was a GM authority on the level of the creator goddesses of order and chaos. This was a rare opportunity, and I felt like it would be a waste to use it just like that. Perhaps I can reconsider my destination. Perhaps I can play some tricks if it's just the choice of destination. This was probably a divine art that could be triggered by certain conditions. In that case, what I wished for would be incredibly important. Just saying a definite destination definitely wouldn't be a mistake. But it seemed that I had an even better choice, and when the area behind me erupted with magical power that engulfed the entire world like a volcanic eruption, I knew that I didn't have much time left. Taking a deep breath, I told him my destination. Whether I lived or died, it was all up to me to take a gamble. I, Roland Mist, wish to go to a destination, the place that Cavendish doesn't want me to go to the most. Chapter 8:11. Wishing magic was a high-circle arcane spell that was exclusive to archmages and powerful existences. However, it wasn't rare in this world. It would often appear in stories, dramas, and myths, but it would either be used as an antagonist, or the result would always be bad. Those who truly knew about this spell would never think of relying on it. Making a wish would make it come true? Heh, if there really was such a good thing, the mags would have long since conquered the world. Those who had used wishing magic before would probably come to the same conclusion: never use wishing magic again. The reason for this was that most wishing magic followed the principle of equivalent exchange. You would receive what you paid for. Don't be greedy. This was the experience of those who had succeeded in making a wish. It was also the final reason why the protagonists of those fables and myths were able to laugh. Those powerful antagonists usually reached their end in greed and desire. Those gods, god equipment, and dimensional lords all used a unique method to fulfill their wishes. Dramas originated from reality. As far as I knew, many stories related to wishing magic were based on reality. Desiring eternal life. Transforming into a stone statue and being buried in the astral plane would grant you absolute eternal life. Desiring greater power. Allowing you to instantly obtain enough power to explode an entire planet. Then, you would truly explode. Desiring to become a god. Either you would be able to merge with a god's corpse in the astral plane, or you would be unable to control your divine concept and divine throne the moment you became a god and instantly perished. Desiring to be surrounded by countless beautiful women. That unlucky mercenary king's eyes were permanently enchanted. From then on, all men in his eyes became all sorts of beautiful women. In a way, this was probably the most pitiful outcome. But since the mercenary king was so satisfied and even created a gigantic harem, just imagining what hell that would be like, it would be better for future generations to not take things too seriously. Wishing magic wasn't a panacea. It was only a mechanism to achieve one's goal through a subtle exchange. Some people said that the gods were the ones who granted wishes. However, no god had ever taken responsibility for such a thing. Most mags believed that the natural laws of the world would complete this exchange. In a sense, this was a transaction that would definitely succeed. Of course, it depended on how you defined success. If you planned to obtain a mountain of gold with 50 cents, then you couldn't blame the wishing spell for distorting your wishes. No matter how much one thought about the words of the wish, it was impossible to change this rule. It was just like how no matter how good one was at bargaining, it was impossible for the owner of a shop to sell his goods at a price lower than the cost. If such a thing really happened, it could only be robbery or fraud. But the benediction spell couldn't find a target to rob. For those who succeeded in making a wish, the magical energy consumed to activate the wishing spell could already be used to accomplish their goals with their own hands. It was destined to be a losing business. However, that doesn't mean that this spell is meaningless. I have seen great Mage Leon who truly knows how to use the wishing spell. The way he uses the wishing spell is really thought-provoking. Make a wish. I want a bottle of 1962 Soth red wine. Make a wish. I wish for the house to become clean. Make a wish. I wish for my apple tree sapling to become a large tree and bear fruit within a day. In his hands, the benediction spell wasn't some kind of ladder to the heavens to achieve his grand goals. Instead, it was a tool to make life more convenient and faster. In his eyes, the benediction spell was essentially no different from other spells. If I want to obtain something, I will obtain it with my own hands. The correct method of making a deal with the world was to stop wanting something, to make a deal that would result in a slight loss, and to obtain convenience after paying an excessive cost. I sensed a power similar to the power of the benediction spell on the monument at the extreme point of this world. It was directly connected to the source of the world and borrowed the power of the creator goddess. The world had to pay the price. It could be said that this existence itself was even more valuable than its power. If I could research the secrets of the creator goddess, even if it was just a tiny bit, it would be an improvement for the entire civilization. Unfortunately, I didn't have the time to research it right now. I could faintly sense that as long as I left this place, I would never be able to return again. This benediction spell limited the scope of a wish, making it impossible to make a wish based on a twisted interpretation. Since the creator goddess had feelings for her children, I wasn't worried that my wish would be granted in the worst possible way. Since that was the case, why not take a gamble? I, Roland Mist, wish to go to the place where Cavendish doesn't want me to appear the most. If this wish couldn't be granted, I could simply change the location. And if my wish was granted, I would most likely appear on the battlefield in Bardi. But if my wish was granted and I didn't appear on that battlefield, then it would truly be worth looking forward to. Recently, I've been on the defensive all this time. That's all because Cavendish has planned ahead of time. I can only keep up with him step by step. Even if I go to the battlefield in Bardi, is that really his weakness? Not necessarily. Now that I had a chance to catch up, why would I give it up? But when I said my wish, I received no response. Just as I was hesitating about whether or not I should change my wish, the world before me changed. Is this the power of the creator goddess? I don't feel anything at all. When I hesitantly looked in front of me, a group of busy imps was also gaping at my sudden appearance. Since they were so shocked, some of them even dropped the items in their hands. But the next instant, when they saw my face clearly, they panicked even more. Asterisk smack. 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 Asterisk whips descended from the sky and scattered all the little demons. The next instant, a high-level succubus landed in front of me and half-knelt in front of me. "Hi Lord, you've returned." I paused in surprise for a moment, but then came to a sudden realization. This succubus had probably mistaken me for Cavendish. Cavendish often took on human form that didn't reveal any of his power. Only someone who was familiar with me would be able to tell us apart. I looked around me. This seemed to be a pitch-black cave, but there were demons and humans everywhere. They seemed to be constructing something. The moment that I looked over, I felt several gazes on me. The next instant, I unhesitatingly activated my original Sin Demon God transformation. The power of the abyss covered my entire body, and the power of the abyss overflowed from my skin. The succubus in front of me seemed to sense something as her entire body trembled in fear. "Who are you? How's the work I gave you going?" The one who asked this question wasn't the succubus who was in charge of this place. Instead, it was me who asked it first. My tone was quite calm, but I didn't hide the arrogance and carelessness in my tone at all. It was highly likely that I was mimicking Cavendish's tone, gambling on the fact that this succubus didn't know Cavendish at all. She was only a high-level succubus. There were at least several 100,000 of them in the Chaos Abyss, if not several million. Normally, even if she saw a Chaos main god, she would only be able to see him from afar. She would only be able to remember his face from his portrait. Since she had already admitted that she was wrong, then this method of mine would have a high chance of succeeding. "Venerated High Lord, I'm the second-rank supervisor Tina. We've been working day and night. Lady Didina personally whipped 37 lazy cowards to death, but that venerated mission is far too difficult. We still need some more time." The succubus knelt on the ground and lowered her head while trembling all over. She didn't even dare to look at me, as if she was afraid that the Chaos main god would tear her to shreds if the project wasn't progressing well enough. I smiled as I looked at the succubus Tina before me. Although it was likely that I wouldn't be able to keep this a secret for long, there was no reason for me to miss out on information that was delivered to my doorstep. "Don't inform them. I'm here in private to check on the project's progress. I want to see if there are any idiots who dare to slack off. Show me the way so that I can see the results of your hard work. If you can't satisfy me." Hee hee. The succubus who had just stood up suddenly felt her legs go weak, and she almost fell to the ground. A strange hee sounded in her mind as she imagined hell's 100 punishments. For a succubus at her level, not to mention the Chaos Main God's anger, even the Chaos Main God's anger would be more than enough to kill her. Demon Main Gods were never reasonable, nor did they need to be reasonable. The pitiful fate of the succubus sisters who had offended a demon main god due to trivial matters in the past was still fresh in Tina's mind. Tina hurriedly crawled forward, but she didn't see the High Lord behind her. She revealed a playful smile. In that case, let me see just what else Cavendish is hiding. Chapter 8:12. The succubus in front of me walked quite slowly. Judging from how she was constantly trembling, she seemed to be quite frightened. And judging from how she kept sneaking glances at me in fear, she seemed to have noticed my displeasure. It seems that the succubus' natural talent of being able to instinctively read others' good and evil is real. The succubus Tina in front of me was constantly cowering. Whenever I looked at her, she would immediately panic. She felt like she could escape at any moment, yet she didn't dare to. This wasn't because I was being overly sensitive. It was because it would be foolish to talk about human rights with a demon. From the very start, all sorts of thoughts had been running through my mind. The most direct one was that I really wanted to find a dark corner and use a soul-searching spell to directly obtain all of the succubus memories. That would be the most direct method. However, I was currently on the main road, and there were too many people looking at me. Right now, I was probably in the enemy's main camp. If I was exposed, I might as well use a milder and more indirect method. I had too little information. The more I said, the more mistakes I would make. It would be better to get more information out of her. Report the latest progress. This seemed simple, but it was actually the most suitable for the current situation. There was no need for a superior to know the progress of a subordinate's work. But this time, I was flirting with a blind person. We're not slacking off. We're really not slacking off. Recent progress. 2 berserk demons joined my team recently. They're really strong and hardworking. It's just that they're a bit smelly. Can we transfer them away? The succubus said a lot of random information, but very little of it was useful. She seemed to notice that I was becoming more and more displeased, so she spoke in a quieter and quieter voice. This wasn't because she saw through anything and was holding back. It was simply because her position was too low, and she knew too little. As a team leader, she would do whatever her superior wanted her to do. She could only see so much. Trivial matters were meaningless to me. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry as I listened to her constantly report on how bad the food was and how stupid her companions were. I patiently listened for quite a while, but apart from learning that they were constructing something, I learned nothing. Where is this place? Just what are you all busy with? Although I really wanted to ask, I could sense that many people were paying attention to me. And if I really asked, I would probably have to consider killing my way out. I patiently continued to listen to her report. It was probably because her expression was getting uglier and uglier that she was already on the verge of tears. However, I didn't tell her to stop, so she continued to rack her brains to find something to say. I used to be a barmaid in Roth City on the 162nd level of the Abyss. I never imagined that I would one day be able to reach the holy land of origin of the demons. Finally, my eyes lit up and I heard a word with weight. The origin of the demons. Am I in the Abyss now? Comparing it with his past memories, there was only one place that fulfilled this condition. At the bottom of the Abyss pool, where Cynthia's body slept. When I turned around a corner and saw the gigantic creature in front of me, I instantly understood. It was a pitch-black wall, so tall that the top could not be seen, and so wide that one could not see the end. Countless demons were busy below, and they seemed to be building something. The door in the middle of the wall was slightly open. When I looked up from the bottom of the wall, I was surprised to discover an old acquaintance. Didina, the former elf empress, was currently commanding the busy demon Laboris below. Meanwhile, Ilmisia, the former queen of all lustful demons, was currently resting by the side. I wouldn't have been so surprised if it was only the two of them. The other familiar person was Leona, who had long since disappeared. The current Chaos Girl didn't have a good appearance. She was embedded into the pitch-black wall, and a powerful demon was currently carving magical runes next to her. Her strange posture made her seem like a living sacrifice. She should have been pregnant for several more months, but her stomach was now bulging. It seemed like she might give birth at any moment. She seemed to sense my gaze as she looked over at me. She opened her mouth slightly, but was unable to say anything. I didn't have the time to respond. When I discovered the scheme here, the mastermind of the scheme naturally recognized me as well. Capture him. His Roland. His not master. I didn't even know which demon was the first to scream out loud. When Didina and Ilmisia looked over at me, not only did their gazes contain surprise, there was also undisguised killing intent. I knew that the only thing I could do now was probably no longer be able to communicate with words. You aren't His Majesty Cavendish. There's an intruder. Guards. The succubus who had been leading me here finally realized what was going on and started summoning the guards. I found this all the more interesting. I never said that I was Cavendish. I'm Cavendish's older brother. Yep, I'm no outsider. Right, thank you for leading me here. The succubus paused in surprise for a moment before she foolishly said, "No need to thank me." I chuckled and shook my head as I looked at how adorably foolish she was. It was truly rare to see such a foolish succubus. I even felt like killing her while I was at it. Tina, you actually dared to betray me. You actually dared to bring Roland here. However, the current Didina had probably lost all sense of reason as she started shouting on the castle walls. Seeing her superior's frantic expression, the unlucky Tina instantly showed despair as if it was the end of the world. The little succubus before me looked at me pitifully. She wanted to hate me, but didn't dare to. I found this even more hilarious. Just what type of succubus was she? She was so incompetent. I wanted to continue chatting with her, but the demons before me had already surrounded me. All I needed to do now was to kill my way through them. A top-level succubus queen and a devil main god. Several dozen demon lords. Thousands of mid- and high-level demons. That was nothing. It seemed that there really was something important here. My mood instantly became much better. Thank you, Aishi. It seems that we've truly surpassed Cavendish. In that case, let me see just what else Cavendish is hiding. Chapter 8:13. From a certain standpoint, Cavendish's scheme had been greatly exposed the moment I saw this scene before me. A scam that's half real and half fake. He's prepared for both. The demons before me were currently constructing a gigantic divine statue just like the one in the Chaos Dimension. I had read battle reports from the front lines. 2 female goddesses were guarding a large door on both sides. This was an altar that was identical to the one in the Chaos Dimension. I instantly felt a chill down my spine from the bottom of my heart. If my inference was correct, this was most likely another dimensional door that was currently being activated. This technique is so familiar. I didn't receive any retort as I exclaimed. It felt rather strange without the silly cat by my side. Isn't this the technique you're most skilled at? No matter how your opponent responds, you'll still be the one to win in the end. Thank you for temporarily acting as my retort slave. I nodded as I slowly unsheathed my sword. The demons had already surrounded me. At this moment, many schemes had been laid out before me. This dimensional door that was constructed at the bottom of the Chaos Abyss was obviously also capable of being activated. In that case, even if Cavendish lost the battle in the Chaos Dimension, he would still be the one to win as long as this dimensional door could be successfully activated. This was double insurance and double the investment. On the surface, the Chaos Dimension was something that the entire world knew about, as if that was the core of Cavendish's scheme. However, it was actually nothing more than bait. No matter how the Order faction responded, the dimensional door would still be opened in the end. As for how Cavendish would achieve the conditions to open the dimensional door, since he had already done so much, he would likely have long since made preparations. However, man proposes, God disposes. A world destroyer would always be defeated by a man with 25 legs. I meant that there would always be various accidents and obstacles. Perhaps the world of Aishi was using me to stop Cavendish. No, you're overthinking things. This is purely a coincidence. If you didn't want to make such a wish, you wouldn't have been able to arrive here. It's impossible to enter through normal means. I casually sliced apart the inferno demons blocking my way as I unhesitatingly attacked the dimensional door. No matter what, destroying this dimensional door first wouldn't be a mistake. The longer I delayed, the stronger my opponent's reinforcements would be. However, the next instant, my sword clashed against a silver sword in an umbrella and was blocked. Hey! I was rather hesitant, as the one before me was Ilmisia, the final Devil Lord. The ironic part was that Ilmisia was a wanted traitor. Now that the other 9 Devil Lords had either died or betrayed Carwens, Ilmisia became the only purebred Devil Lord. The famous queen was more than 3 meters tall. Her devilish curves were undoubtedly seductive. Her pure and pleasant face was as pure as an angel's, perfectly illustrating the meaning of an angel's face and a devil's body. However, her usual smile had vanished without a trace. Currently, Ilmisia's expression was filled with killing intent. She wielded her sword with one hand and swung her sword in the air. However, her figure seemed illusory and real at the same time. It would seem that she was quite skilled. I couldn't help but recall the unlucky Lasnina, the Lord of Curses. Lasnina was an excellent magic swordswoman, and it seemed that Lasnina and Lasnina had once been lovers. Just based on Lasnina's attitude, Ilmisia was completely different from the rumors. Vaguely, from those beautiful eyes that were glaring angrily at me, I could sense her resolve. Stop Roland at all costs, even at the cost of your life. I rubbed my head, feeling a slight headache. It wasn't that Ilmisia's power level was enough to threaten me, as I had already directly defeated more than 1 or 2 Devil Lords. Ilmisia definitely wasn't the strongest of them all. No matter what, Ilmisia was Cavendish's woman. This shouldn't have been able to stop me. However, Eliza had also blocked Cavendish's path like this back in the Hades. Judging from what happened afterwards, Cavendish had indeed gone easy on her. If I killed Ilmisia now, it would be obvious. You'll go easy on her? Or do you think that you'll owe her a favor? That's not your style. Think about it. If Cavendish succeeds, that means, hey, at least let me hesitate for 1 second. At the very least, that'll be more like a human. I rudely interrupted my system's nagging as mana gathered around my sword. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, I didn't even try to conceal my killing intent. I wouldn't say anything unnecessary, nor would I think anything unnecessary. No matter what the reason was, no matter what favor I owed, there was no reason for me to stop here. Awaken, light of dawn. When the entire world was illuminated, it was time for the slaughter. However, the demon's furious and fearful expressions were illuminated. Ilmisia, I'll seriously go easy on you. Please don't die. While everything was shrouded in shadows, the chaotic dimension also descended into a storm. The Order gods, who could only be seen in statues in shrines in the past, all appeared in reality. They roared, charged, slaughtered, and then collapsed on the battlefield. The will of the Chaos Abyss urged all the demon lords to enter the battlefield. They were either forced to helplessly or excitedly respond to the summons. Their fates were exactly the same as their old enemies. In fact, they were even more pitiful. That was because the furious god of holy light was impossible to stop. Nobody would stop him. In this dimension, not a single person could remain idle. That was because there would always be someone who would become their enemy. The holy war between Order and the Chaos Abyss was forcefully carried out in this narrow dimension. The venerated gods and the evil demon lords were no different. They could only fight for a chance at survival. The nature gods encountered the corruption and poison god systems. The giant dragons and the inferno dragons fought fiercely against each other. The ancient snake god had already been killed by the dwarf gods. The evil god of the abyss that everyone feared was nothing more than cannon fodder on this battlefield. The most eye-catching battle of all was probably the battle between Denotes and the god of holy light. This chaotic battlefield was like a vacuum. It was impossible to see through it. Senses were also useless. The only thing that could be detected by the outside world was the faintly discernible gigantic figure burning on top of the ball of light. The undead Emperor Sandro also met his match. Sandro felt rather conflicted as he looked at Conservation, who had a face filled with hatred. The Tark Republic was already lacking in power to begin with. Sandro would never be happy if he had to fight amongst himself. When he thought about how the Tark Republic was expanding its territory in the far north, as well as the living hidden in the Northlands, the ancient undead Emperor Sandro finally made up his mind. Do your best to breathe. This will be your final chance. Everything shall return to the undying. The undead Emperor Sandro tossed away his own flesh as if he was tearing off a robe. He transformed into a grayish-brown tornado that instantly spread out. Everything he touched, no matter if it was the living or the dead, would instantly wither up and become desiccated corpses. The only difference was that the speed at which the undead were instantly eroded was even faster. At the same time, Conservation also activated her own personal domain, a world of ice and snow. Meanwhile, the other undead emperor, the undead marshal, was furiously slaughtering the undead on the battlefield. The magic sword he wielded wasn't the usual bone greatsword. This black short sword was quite inconspicuous. It wasn't as sharp as normal swords. However, anyone who touched this sword would instantly collapse. No matter if they were evil gods, demons, or even order true gods or angels, they would all voluntarily avoid the undead marshal's area. This magic sword was currently devouring all the undead on the battlefield. It was furiously evolving and growing. Right now, even the undead marshal himself was rather afraid of this magic sword's power. He could faintly sense that this magic sword was currently devouring his own soul. However, he didn't dare to abandon this magic sword at all. After all, this was part of the deal. Not only that, this was an important task that Sandro had personally entrusted to him. Using countless gods and demons as sacrifices for this sword, you've once again reached the peak of undead. Junior, you're far more amazing than any of your seniors. Chapter 8:14. Actually, I have a personal matter that I'd like to ask of you. A few days ago at the Cloud Tower, after Sandro and Roland reached a private agreement, Roland asked Sandro for a favor. Actually, I have an undead magic sword that needs to absorb living and undead souls in order to evolve. The main battlefield in the Chaos Dimension will likely become the best meat grinder for me, as well as the final opportunity for me to complete my magic sword. But, as you know, my identity is rather special. Sometimes, it was enough to say half of something. Sandro now completely understood. Right now, I had many identities. I was the Prince of the Northlands and the representative of Hell. But if I looked at it from the perspective of the entire mortal plane, the most important and most accepted identity was still Estrada's successor, the strongest holy knight in the world. Perhaps the representative of the Hades was important enough in the world of high-level existences. Perhaps the royalty and nobles of the various countries felt that the newly risen Mist Alliance in the Northlands was suppressing them, but it was likely that most ordinary people in this world didn't even know what this represented. The ordinary people of the major countries in the mortal plane wouldn't care about the Hades. What were those? I'd never even heard of them, the Prince of the Northlands, a countryside royalty. But for the commoners, none of these titles were as important and stable as the strongest holy knight in the world. Roland's other identity was also becoming more and more important. The creator of the Southern Sect, the discoverer of the teachings of pure holy light. From a certain standpoint, Roland's relationship with the Southern Sect was similar to Jesus' relationship with the Cross Church, or Buddha's relationship with Buddhism. Of course, for the current church members, the revival of the Southern Sect would definitely be a calamity, which was why both Roland and the Southern Sect chose to forget about this relationship. Some things couldn't be erased. Just like how Roland had brought holy light to the world, Roland was the discoverer of the teachings of pure holy light. He would definitely be recorded in history as well. Originally, Roland did not pay much attention to this point. He did not pursue fame, but some things could not be decided by individual will. For the time being, let's not consider who the final victor of the Holy War would be. If everything went smoothly, after the threat of the Chaos faction and Cavendish was eliminated, the Holy Light faction and the Hades faction would definitely have an in-depth exchange. The Holy Church's greatest reliance was naturally the belief in the Holy Light among the entire human world. In order to shake the Holy Church's authority, one would naturally have to shake its belief. At that time, the conflict between the Southern sect and the Holy Church would be the most important breakthrough point. The Hades would definitely support the Southern sect and fight the Holy Church to the bitter end. In that case, I, as the forgotten founder of the pure holy light religion, would naturally become the center of attention and become the focus of public opinion. Since ancient times, the simplest and most practical way to discredit a religion or a force was to prove that its founder was a liar, a bastard, or a scumbag with a bad character. Then, the doctrine that he advocated would naturally become a joke. This method was widely used even in the modern era. And the Holy Church was definitely an expert at slandering people in religious wars. Now that I thought about it, it was quite ironic. Even before victory was achieved, the two factions that were at odds with each other on the surface were already plotting how to stab their companions in the back. However, working together for a common goal while having internal strife seemed to have become an unchanging rule in human society for thousands of years. As the bridge between the Hades and the Southern sect, Roland had a special and important status. If his reputation was damaged, not only would it be his reputation that would be damaged, it would also affect the legitimacy of the entire Southern sect. There were some things that everyone knew in private, but they could pretend not to know. There were also some things that, once exposed, might not only hurt the parties involved. For example, the Holy Church clearly knew that Roland was Emperor Yunye, but they definitely wouldn't use this information to attack Roland. That was because they would have to explain why the Holy Church didn't kill Roland even though he was in public. Perhaps, after thousands of years, the Southern sect's founder would become a true saint due to the gods and Undying's willful forgetfulness. Things like Emperor Yunye would naturally disappear in the annals of history. Since Roland was currently trying his best to wash his reputation clean, it didn't matter what he did in private. However, it would definitely be a major taboo to openly summon souls. Some residents of the mortal plane were already able to accept that undead magic wasn't evil. The evil ones were the ones using it. However, most people believed that forcefully absorbing the soul power of the dead was the most evil of all evils. They didn't care that undead magic was also part of the cycle of reincarnation. Everything would eventually return to the Gui Ming River and the cycle of reincarnation. In their eyes, undead mag's actions of causing the souls of the dead to scatter was no different from digging up the graves of their ancestors. It might even be worse. In order to complete the strongest original sin sword, Roland would need a large number of souls. It could be predicted that a large number of demons, angels, and even gods would die here in the chaotic battlefield. Such an advantageous material would be something that could only be discovered by luck. An ancient battlefield where gods had died would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for an undead mage. However, it was likely that all the gods and powerful individuals would appear on this battlefield. If he absorbed souls to complete the magic sword, not only would his reputation be damaged, he would also be in a disadvantageous position politically. That was why Roland racked his brains and came up with an alternative method, which was to have someone else help him complete the soul absorption process. But when he came up with this method, there was actually a very limited number of people to choose from. First of all, the undead mage needed to be skilled in undead magic in order to be able to absorb souls. Secondly, the undead mage needed to be incredibly powerful, at least semigod level. Otherwise, the undead mage would be instantly devoured by the magic sword. Also, the undead mage needed to be brave enough to absorb souls in front of the gods. Not only would the undead mage be shameless, but the undead mage needed to be skilled in undead magic as well. Roland found Sandro and used him as a bargaining chip to revive the Tark Republic, forcing Sandro to take the blame for Roland. As for the undead emperors, since the blame was already irreparable, it didn't matter if they took the blame a little more. Currently, the undead marshal wielded his pitch-black short sword and went on a killing spree on the battlefield. Countless souls and divine soul shards were being absorbed by the sword, filling the entire area with countless vengeful souls and divine souls. Meanwhile, the altar that was currently opening was also furiously absorbing the life force and souls of the sacrifices. Life force and flesh were being sacrificed to the altar, while soul shards were being absorbed by the magic sword. Both sides had a clear division of labor. The entire battlefield, which was a super dangerous battlefield where gods and demons perished, had now become nothing more than sacrifices for a pair of brothers to achieve their goals. And finally, as the gods perished, the short sword that represented the 7 deadly sins finally matured. Chapter 8:15. The God of Holy Light, K.A. Rowland, was the most glorious existence in the world. He stood at the very top of the Order gods and was the God King of the Holy Light faction. He was publicly acknowledged as the strongest main god and undefeatable. From the moment that K.A. Rowland appeared on the battlefield, he naturally became the focus of the entire battlefield. Boundless light spread out with K.A. Rowland as the center. Holy light cleansed everything before it. Just his existence alone was enough to deal a painful blow to the undead and demons. The venerated God of Holy Light illuminates everything. Demons in the darkness have nowhere to hide from him. Look at how powerful he is. Even the strongest demon can't withstand a single spear strike from him. Even the most sly devil can't escape from his divine eyes. Within the sun, one could faintly see a figure wielding a spear sitting atop a giant dragon. Every time he charged, everything in front of him would be purified. Even the most powerful abyssal lord would instantly be reduced to dust by him. The scene before me made my praise seem so real. It would have been even better if the person saying this wasn't Cavendish, who was smiling and watching the show. Donates. 10 minutes ago, the furious Chaos War god faced the sun. Now, the pile of dust on the ground was probably the last trace of him. Even a Chaos Evil god would be cleansed by the tremendous amount of holy light. Up until the very last moment, the war god didn't make a single sound even though he was pierced by a spear of holy light and burned by the holy light. However, his roars of pain and hatred never stopped. Foolish K.A. Rowland. Let go of me, cowardly Cavendish. Against me, a warrior should die for the honor of challenging a stronger existence, rather than foolishly committing suicide. The target of his hatred wasn't just the venerated god of holy light. It was likely that up until the very last moment, he hated the Chaos Prince who had forced him to his death. Unfortunately for him, the God of Holy Light still didn't give him a chance to take revenge even after he was reduced to ashes. In the God of Holy Light's mechanical logic, cleansing a powerful prey that had delivered itself to him was obviously the most important choice. Donates has been cleansed. A glorious victory. Next. Then, Rowland searched for his next target, and Cavendish naturally sent another unlucky guy to him. Snake God Voka, look at how well Donates has done. Aren't you going to express your gratitude? I definitely didn't choose you because of your relationship with that person and your stance isn't firm. Snake God Voka was so angry that his entire body was trembling. However, there was nothing he could do. He could only walk in front and instantly transform into a giant snake that wrapped around the sun. Since the evil gods of the Chaos Abyss lived in the Chaos Abyss, they were all gods who swore loyalty to the will of the Chaos Abyss. Not only was it their duty to fight for the Chaos Abyss when necessary, it was also the contract between the gods and the Chaos Abyss Master. Of course, such a contract would have limited binding power. There would also be many restrictions. For example, the Chaos Abyss would be in danger, the number of times the Chaos Abyss could attack would be limited, and the duration of the battle would be limited. But right now, Cavendish wasn't giving the Chaos Abyss any time to find loopholes. Voka has been purified. Next. The sly ancient snake god didn't even have a chance to switch sides before the god of Holy Light stabbed him to death with a single spear strike. Now, the Chaos Abyss had directly sent these Chaos Abyss gods onto the battlefield. The Chaos Abyss's mortal enemy, the Order gods, had no way of retreating. Fortunately, the strongest individuals in the Chaos Abyss, including the Chaos main gods, were all strong enough to resist the Chaos Abyss's repulsive power. Otherwise, the battle would naturally be even more intense. Donates. It was his fault for being here from the very start. Right now, Cavendish was sending the Chaos Abyss lords up one by one and forcefully ordering them to attack the God of Holy Light. See Tesla, aren't you going to show off after seeing how hard your seniors are working? These powerful existences that had always looked down on mortals and short-lived species were now lining up and being stabbed to death by the God of Holy Light one spear strike at a time. They would then transform into divine souls and divine power shards that became nutrients for the river Styx and the altar. Carwen's glanced to the southwest. There, a power was currently seizing control over souls and unowned divine power. And the elemental ripples of that power were so familiar. It was strengthening and maturing. Although it was quite far away, Cavendish instinctively felt threatened. This was a power that could destroy all souls. This is going to be fun. Even though Cavendish clearly had enough chess pieces and felt threatened, he didn't intend to stop it at all. It was the opposite. His interest had been piqued, and he was now annoyed by the toys before him. Next. Forget it. Your remaining nutrients are too lousy. Come at me together. Cavendish didn't even look at the Chaos Abyss Lord's final expressions of hatred. He sensed the divine souls and divine power being constantly absorbed by the altar as he watched the gods battle before him. He couldn't help but sigh. Mortals worship the gods, and the gods protect mortals. How laughable. Mortals are clearly afraid, cowardly, and too weak, so they entrust everything to the gods. Those useless cowards even gave themselves away to the gods. No wonder the gods look down on their own worshippers so much. So ugly, so ugly, so ugly, so weak, so ugly. Their cowardly selves are so disgusting. On the distant altar, the goddesses of chaos and chaos were staring at each other. Wherever they looked, a black light was tearing through space as a dimensional door was opening. Venerated goddesses? They're just two foolish women who've been scared witless. A shepherd and a flock of sheep. It's clearly a big bad wolf and a flock of sheep. But what's interesting is that no matter if they were wolves or sheep when they were alive, they would eventually become fertilizer for the earth, nourishing the new plains, and becoming fodder for the sheep. The cycle of reincarnation. How grand, how grand. Damn the grand cycle of reincarnation. Isn't this just AF * King Giant Cage? Why make it sound so pleasant? I'm so moved that I'm crying. Cavendish even wiped the corners of his eyes as if he really were crying. Now that all the cannon fodder had become sacrifices, the god of holy light, who had become much dimmer, had finally locked onto the mastermind behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Cavendish smiled as he welcomed the undefeatable strongest main god. Then, he transformed into a powerful torrent that could destroy everything. The Abyss Prince, Cavendish, unhesitatingly chose the most spectacular outcome, the final move of a god self-destruction. After the terrifying tempest passed, the god of holy light's figure finally became clear. He was still incredibly powerful despite being covered in wounds, but he was no longer undefeatable. As for Carwen's final words in the mortal plane, nobody understood them at all. Brother, I'm going out to play. Brother, I'm going out to play. At the same time, somewhere else, there was a body that had just awakened from its slumber. This was a mortal body, and it also said the same thing. However, this murmur received an unexpected response. What made Cavendish unable to believe was that a familiar voice was right in front of him. You're not allowed to. Chapter 8:16. After returning from death, Cavendish's vision was still completely pale, and his ears were ringing. Due to certain reasons, that unfamiliar and intense feeling of vomiting made him feel incredibly nauseous. It was to be expected that his vision hadn't recovered. Since he had just started using his eyes, they still needed time to warm up. This physical body of his had been prepared for this for almost a month already. He hadn't had a single drop of food or water for an entire month. Plus, his body's special condition meant that his mortal body had reached its limit. If it wasn't for the fact that this physical body of his was an excellent swordsman with excellent foundations to begin with, perhaps the first thing he would do right now would be to rest and recover for half a year. Brother, I'm going out to play. A raspy voice was squeezed out from his withered lips. His original body's words were repeated once again. This was a sign that his soul and physical body had synchronized. You're not allowed. When Cavendish woke up from his deep sleep, before he could get used to the changes in his two physical bodies, what greeted him was a low roar filled with denial. The expected scene of construction in the Chaos Abyss was nowhere to be seen. The servants didn't welcome him either. It was inconceivable how someone with evil intentions had arrived here. Roland. The demon elites that Roland had personally chosen were now nothing more than pieces of minced meat. The golden-haired holy knight was clutching a beautiful devil's neck in a pool of blood. Ha 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 ha, as expected of Roland. I never expected that you would appear here. Cavendish paused in surprise for a moment before he actually started laughing out loud. Currently, I was rather stunned as well. He had familiar blonde hair, familiar blue eyes, and familiar face. However, he had a completely unfamiliar body and gender. Cavendish? Leona? I couldn't help but ask. Even though I clearly felt that the person in front of me was that bastard younger brother of mine, even though I had already predicted the possibility of this happening, but when it really happened in front of me, I was still shocked. My foolish younger brother, sister, cough, as expected, Leona was your backup plan from the very start. The physical body that Cavendish had possessed was none other than the Holy Maiden of the Church of Lightning and Sword, Leona. This chaos girl who had managed to escape the slaughter was now embedded in the dimensional altar like a sacrificial offering. All of this was for this very moment. The golden-haired woman looked at me in disbelief. She was so weak that she couldn't even stand properly. Her bulging belly was quite eye-catching, but in a way, this was indeed the reason why things had developed to such a state. For demons, offspring are a kind of property, but to go to such an extent, you're really crazy. Just like how Cavendish had once possessed Renee, the bloodline connection between demon nobles and lords of the abyss meant that their descendants were controlled by their ancestors. For a half-demon species, being summoned by their bloodline to become laborious was nothing much. The most pitiful ending was probably becoming a backup body for their ancestors. His consciousness had been erased, his knowledge and power had become food for his ancestors. Everything he had painstakingly obtained had been devoured, and all traces of his existence had been erased. Many powerful demon gods and demon lords had revived in the physical bodies of their descendants after they died in battle. However, this was usually only a backup plan. The result of doing so would be that they would lose everything in the past and have to start over again. And those descendants would only be mixed-blood descendants who had obtained a portion of the original bloodline. Their bloodline abilities and upper limits would often be weaker than the original demon gods and demon lords. It would also be difficult for them to surpass the original limit of their power level. Powerful demons would never choose to use this method unless absolutely necessary. However, Cavendish was different. He was incredibly different. From the very start, I noticed that something was off about this demon fetus. Such a powerful and pure high-level demon bloodline is something that can shake the foundational power level of a god. It's impossible for this demon fetus to be an accident. And, the most important part is that it's impossible for his soul to exist. After secretly performing a series of dissection experiments on Leona, after examining her, I discovered to my astonishment that my future nephew was actually a dead fetus without a soul. This fetus was the crystallization of the power of chaos. Although Leona was his mother, in a way, she was nothing more than a vessel. The true creator of this fetus was Cavendish, who had split off a small portion of himself. Once this fetus matured, even if it was impossible for him to swiftly reach Cavendish's level of power, it would only be a matter of time before he became a powerful god. Naturally, I had paid so much in hopes of obtaining even more. The price of sacrificing a main god was already laid out in front of me. Now, Cavendish's goal of possessing this fetus and using it to control the mother's body was also laid out in front of me. Cavendish, you abandoned a main god-level existence in order to pass through that wall? Behind the altar was a boundless pitch-black wall. I also learned what this wall was used for from the murals on it that were related to the goddess of chaos. Only a girl of chaos can become Cynthia. Only Cynthia can pass through this wall and reach Cynthia's place of hibernation. This was the creator goddess of chaos foundational setting. It was the ultimate insurance to protect her physical body. In normal situations, it would be impossible to pass through this wall. However, Cavendish and the others had managed to find a loophole in this rule. A fetus that was living inside a girl of chaos body, would naturally be able to enter and obtain Cynthia's physical body, power, and authority. And then, Cynthia's physical body would descend upon the mortal world and use her creator goddess authority to open up the dimensional door. This was Cavendish's ultimate plan. Currently, Cavendish wasn't panicking at all. That was because the altar was right next to the wall, and the wall that mortals couldn't pass through was now open for him. "Ha, Roland, let's chat later." She turned around and wanted to enter the wall, but I coldly uttered a completely inappropriate threat. "Cavendish, you'd better turn around, unless you don't want to take her life." I pointed at Ilmisia, who was in my hand. I sliced a thin ice blade across Ilmisia's slender neck, leaving a blood-red mark. "You don't seem like a good character at all. Didn't you say before that the villains who threaten hostages are all low-level villains who die incredibly quickly?" Carwens paused for a moment. But then, he said something from the past that even I couldn't remember. I originally thought that he would at least hesitate for a moment, but the next instant, Leona turned around and rolled her eyes before she laughed heartlessly. "Leona, go ahead and kill me if you want to. So many people have died already, so one more won't matter. Once the dimensional door is opened, even more people will die." Hee hee. Even though he was clearly speaking the apocalyptic truth, his frivolous and expectant tone made him seem like a naughty child looking forward to his birthday. The final elimination after the dimensional door was opened was a festival that he had desired for a very long time. All the sacrifices and deaths before this were nothing more than a warm-up for the festival. At this moment, I understood that Ilmisia was meaningless to him. He didn't care at all. He didn't even care what would happen to him in the Armageddon. Destruction? Evolution? Actually, none of that mattered. It was fine as long as he had fun. But I knew what he cared about. And so, I took a deep breath and slowly moved my ice blade away from Ilmisia's neck. I then transformed it into a short blade and pointed it at my own chest. "Cavendish, you and I share the same soul. If I don't die, you won't die, and I won't die as long as you don't die. But, perhaps it's time for us to die together." The blade itself didn't have any meaning. But, this was only a declaration of his resolution and attitude. Cavendish turned around again. This time, he finally furrowed his eyebrows. Eliza was correct. As expected, after you found out about our undying nature, you used this technique to take me down with you whenever I had a great advantage. Honestly, dying together with a man is so disgusting. At this moment, I was also disgusted by this. This is clearly a noble act of self-sacrifice. No matter how bad it is, it counts as taking on your responsibility as an older brother. Can you not make it sound so disgusting? I had goosebumps all over my body. This was clearly a battlefield that concerned the survival of the entire world. Couldn't he be slightly more serious? Sacrifice? For the sake of the mortals who betrayed us? Or the Holy Church that destroyed our families and countries? Hey, can you stop being such a saint? Such a person won't have a good ending. He'll definitely die. At this moment, I paused again. What he said made so much sense that I actually didn't know what to say. How should I deal with this? I'm waiting online, it's urgent. Chapter 8:17. Cavendish is a bug. I wasn't praising or belittling him. I was simply stating that the existence named Cavendish was an error of the world. With my understanding of the natural laws of order, of the four elements that created the world, only time and space were the most order powers. They were the X and Y axes of the world, the coordinates of the entire world. And, these two powers would forever stand at the very bottom of the natural laws of order. That's right, the very bottom. They were the cornerstone that created everything. Many dimensional existences used the relative stability of time and space as their foundation. The power of time and space was the cornerstone, as well as the peak and source. The two major elements corresponding to chaos were the soul and life, but I won't talk about them for now. When time and space were combined together, they formed the power of space and time. And, the most amazing application of the power of space and time wasn't the high-level ability to stop time, nor was it the mysterious and unfathomable spatial teleportation. Rather, it was the incomprehensible and abnormal true prophecy. Unlike ordinary prophecies, this wasn't something that could be controlled by the river of fate, nor was it some random prophecy. Rather, it was the use of the power of space and time to create a data model of reality, and then extrapolate it, extending the x and y axes to obtain new coordinates and what the future would look like. For example, an existence with such an ability would be able to view the world as if it were an anime. She would only need to drag the progress bar, and the data would be decoded into an image, allowing her to directly see the plot. This kind of ability was clearly beyond the comprehension of mortals. It was just like how the 2D world could not understand the 3D world. How could the person in the video have the authority to pull the progress bar? This kind of GM-like ability could only be held by the GM of this world. Astrea, the goddess of order, was the only existence who had this authority. And this authority obviously had a weakness. When this woman felt that the video's plot wasn't as she wanted, she personally changed the plot. This meant that she had given up her identity as a 3D existence and entered the 2D world. In that case, she naturally lost the authority to continue dragging the progress bar. And her very existence and all her actions had already changed the plot's development, causing everything to go out of control. She only had one chance to change the plot, so she naturally had to grasp the critical point. Cavendish is a bug. Cavendish shouldn't have existed in this world. The Abyss Prince, Fate's child, was Cynthia's most precious illegitimate child. He was the crystallization of the power of the Chaos Abyss, and was a key character in her victory in the Holy War. In the original storyline, in the video that Astrea watched, the Chaos Abyss Prince named Roland obtained knowledge from another world and became the main character of this world. Roland's fate was so rough that it could be written into a 20-million-word novel. To omit the entire story, Roland was heartbroken by the Holy Church, which represented human society. Roland finally lost his last bit of faith in humanity and entered the Chaos Abyss in despair. When he led the demon army back to the human world, it would also be the time when humans completely lost their dominance. Such a key character was an opportunity to change everything. Astrea unhesitatingly used the same trick again. Her remnant soul entered the pregnant Roland's mother's body and quietly waited for Roland to be born. Unfortunately, the previous Chaos Abyss Prince's betrayal had led to the birth of the Holy Light and the Holy Church. Cynthia, who had suffered at the hands of the Chaos Abyss, also entered the will of the Chaos Abyss into Roland's mother's body. She prepared to personally guide the Chaos Abyss Prince's growth and personally shape his worldview. The two thieves reached their hands into each other's pockets. I meant that the two sisters were so happy to meet that their brains almost spilled out. In the end, their argument was just like in a fairy tale where two mothers fought over the ownership of a child. They each pulled on the child's arm, and the real mother could only helplessly let go after hearing the child's screams of pain. But the Chaos Abyss Prince who knew right from wrong would never have thought of the possibility that neither mother was the real mother. Such a tragedy, Teacher Yi's accent. The pitiful child was directly torn in half by the two stepmothers before he was even born. While the mother was still pregnant, one soul was forcefully split into two. The physical body also changed, and the only child became twins. However, having an insufficient soul was the cruelest of all innate deficiencies. Children who lost their souls would either be idiots or mentally handicapped. If the two stepmothers didn't want to obtain two mentally handicapped children who were completely useless, the two stepmothers had to do something. What could they do? They were two souls. That's right, just as everyone could see, the two sisters made the exact same choice. They used their own souls to make up for the incomplete souls, just like how a mother would use breast milk to feed a newborn. However, they did even worse. They basically used their own flesh and blood to make up for the newborn's insufficiency. The two mothers were connected to the newborn, becoming a part of them. The two newborns were also quite fortunate to have some of the Chaos Goddess's traits. I would be inclined towards order, while he would be inclined towards chaos. This wasn't a coincidence, but rather a necessity. The end result was an interesting hypothesis. It was similar to that famous wooden boat that had its parts changed countless times. When one person's parts were replaced one by one, creating two soul-stitched demons, would the two people that were finally pieced together still be independent individuals? Actually, nobody should have known the answer to this question, nor would it have any practical meaning. However, due to some unexpected circumstances, the answer was given beforehand. I had died. The Abyss Prince was also a living creature. He was also a part of the cycle of reincarnation. However, he didn't have any special ability to surpass the cycle of reincarnation. However, I was able to survive in the cycle of reincarnation and swim in the river Styx. The reason? It wasn't simply because of Astria's existence. Even if Astria was able to protect herself in the river Styx, she wouldn't be able to protect the mortal part of her soul. As a remnant soul, she could only move her mouth. The river Styx is unable to devour me because I'm still alive. That's right, this world still treated Cavendish and Roland as the same person. Only a part of Roland had fallen into the river Styx. Roland hadn't died yet, so he hadn't transformed into an undead yet. His soul was still complete, and the river Styx was unable to enter him. Naturally, he wouldn't be able to return to the cycle of reincarnation. The reason for this bug? It was likely directly related to the Chaos Goddess's GM powers. This was the unimaginable truth of the existence known as Undying Roland and the undying nature of his existence. Has Cavendish ever died before? Perhaps only he knows. But since he knows the truth behind undying nature, he should have died before. He's an Abyss Prince who isn't afraid of death or failure. It's no wonder that he grew up so quickly. Astria understood this better than anyone else. However, she never told me the truth. In fact, it was the opposite. She even actively tried to make me think about the unique nature of a transmigrator's soul. Actually, if I thought about it more carefully, wouldn't transmigrators still have to go to hell if they stayed in their own world? There wouldn't be any difference. As for the reason why she never told me the truth, you're afraid that if the situation becomes bad for me, I'll choose to die together with you in order to stop Cavendish. Wouldn't you? After thinking about it, I answered her in an abnormally honest manner. Yes, I would. As long as I can stop Cavendish from opening the dimensional door, I'll use all my resources and use all my methods. Since we have such a connection, I'll naturally use it. Astria had seen through me and lied. Cavendish had also seen through me and told the truth. That was why he successfully convinced Eliza to stop me, because Eliza had also seen through me. This is truly so subtle that it makes me feel rather annoyed. Currently, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry as I looked at my younger sister and sensed her familiar soul wavelengths. Fortunately, the current situation was within my expectations. Cavendish wasn't undefeatable. Perhaps I wouldn't even need to use that technique to stop Cavendish. There's a magic sword that can destroy all souls. Chapter 8:18. As I looked at the pregnant Cavendish in front of me, even though I knew that he was currently possessing a demon fetus, I still mysteriously felt that it was rather comical. That's what you get for always making other people pregnant. How do you feel now? Do you really want to vomit? TSK, you're the only male who can experience what it's like to be pregnant. Don't be ridiculous. How can there be always? Oh, Roland, you're truly sly. You're still trying to get information out of me at a time like this. It seemed that Cavendish's anger wasn't fake. I nodded slightly as this was doubtlessly good news. Although a powerful demon's direct descendant would be a demon's property and backup physical body, the birth of such a descendant would also truly weaken a demon's power. There would definitely be a limited number of such descendants. And since Cavendish didn't have any other backup, then, although I'm quite sorry about Leona, explode, reality. With a snap of my fingers, the Cavendish before me exploded. His face was filled with shock and disbelief as he instantly exploded. Leona's head fell to the ground. Her eyes were still staring blankly at the sky even though she had died with a grievance. Your Highness. Next to me, Ilmisia screamed pitifully as she furiously crawled over to Leona's corpse. It seemed that what just happened had destroyed everything for her. TSK, as expected, he didn't die. Hey, stop pretending. I'm not dead yet, so Cavendish isn't dead yet. At most, he'll return to the river Styx to take a bath. I don't think that you don't even know this. Although I said such cold-blooded words, I was still on guard. Indeed, since I already knew the nature of a demon's bloodline, and since I already knew how special the demon fetus was through dissecting it, how could I not make preparations beforehand when I had the chance to dissect it? I considered the fact that Carwen's would be able to possess her the moment that this backup physical body was activated. Carwen's also had plenty of magical power on hand, so it would be impossible to fool these demons with my usual methods. So, what I did was, a goblin bomb. Among necromancy spells, there was a bone-type spell. It was actually manipulating bones to attack with bone spears or defend with bone walls. The basics were extracting bones and adjusting the shape of the bones. An undead bone mage could suck out a person's complete skeleton just by touching them. Although I didn't specialize in the bone element, I still had the basics. Through surgery and necromancy, I replaced a few of Leona's bones with a few metal tubes wrapped around the bones. Buried within the metal tube were several small jars of special goblin engineering creations. The power of these jars was undeniable. Since they were pure products of physics, it would be impossible to discover them without dissecting them. This is just a convenient backup plan. If it can't be used, I will dissect it again after the matter is settled and change the bones again. What a pity. I coldly looked at the flesh and blood in front of me. I wouldn't say anything like your sacrifice is meaningful or your death will save more people even if it was the truth. This was slaughter, an evil act for personal gain. This was my choice. Ilmisia was hugging Leona's head and crying loudly like a child. But, no matter how good their relationship is, Ilmisia, as the Devil Lord, wouldn't be so weak. Nor would she expose herself to me. And so, I coldly drew my sword again. Ilmisia, are you pregnant as well? Let me check. I didn't need to say anything else. Ilmisia unhesitatingly tossed away Leona's head and started crawling towards the wall of the chaos abyss. TSK, how sly. When I said sly, I wasn't referring to Ilmisia. I was referring to Cavendish, who pretended to be tricked by me. Of course I could tell by now. Since Ilmisia was also trying to pass through the wall of the chaos abyss, that meant that Ilmisia, who had always been by Cavendish's side, was also a chaos girl, and was also pregnant with a demon child. How unpleasant. Although this job was quite unpleasant, I couldn't possibly stop moving. My wings gave me explosive power, and I instantly rushed in front of Ilmisia, who had both her legs broken. It would seem that breaking her legs ahead of time was the correct preparation. I silently looked at her as I gathered the power of holy light in front of my sword. Roland. You bastard. You'll die a horrible death. Ha. It would seem that even the Devil Lord was acting like a woman at a time like this. Her curses were as boring as ever. Speaking of which, killing one's own sister-in-law and nephew, and then hunting down the other, was indeed the behavior of a villain. As for whether I would die a horrible death, I'd died so many times already, but I'd never died of old age even once. I'd also been to the Inferno more than once, so it wouldn't be bad to go to the Inferno of Hades for a vacation. My ending. At the very least, you won't have the chance to see it. Holy light gathered into a blade of light that sliced down at high speed. Even the Devil Lord would be reduced to ash by this blade. Asterisk clang. Asterisk, but this time, the blade of light was blocked by a greyish-black magic sword. Ilmisia glared at me. Then, a smile appeared in her beautiful eyes as her mouth arced upwards. That familiar smile, Cavendish. Yes. Brother, that's exactly what I've been looking forward to. Let's have a good fight. Ilmisia's face flushed red as she laughed out loud. She revealed an incomprehensible maniacal expression. I knew that this was a sign that Cavendish was being serious. Unlike Leona's weak physical body, Ilmisia was a Devil Lord. Although she wasn't a main god, she was still a top-level existence in this world. Even I would find it difficult to defeat her. I had only been able to win because of my Dawn Holy Light Sword, which countered her. But now, Ilmisia had a main god's inner core, along with a demon fetus of the same origin as her power source. It was likely that the current Ilmisia was no longer the same as before. At the very least, it didn't make sense that she would be weaker than me. Come, brother, it's about time for us to have a good fight.